Welcome, my friends. I'm pleased to welcome you again to Midnight Stories. Gather around the campfire while I share with you magical adventure stories before sleeping outdoors. Let's embark on a peaceful journey through the serene wilderness and drift off to sleep under the stars. But before that, please consider giving us a like. I was 7 years old when this trip took place. My dad won a lottery to obtain a permit to camp in Cane Gulch in southern Utah, a land beloved by my family for its rugged terrain and serene beauty. This particular canyon is well known for having multiple cliffside dwellings of the ancient Anasazi people. So intact even after hundreds of years, you can still see the cobs of the corn they ate, the feathers of the turkeys they raised and slaughtered, ancient fragments of pottery they created when they still roamed those lands, all of which could still be found amongst the arcane houses like they were just there a few days ago. The plan for the first night was to hike the 7 or 8 miles into the designated campsites at the end of the canyon and camp there for the night. The hike itself took you right underneath what must have been a dozen Anasazi dwellings, which you could all climb into with the ladders they made in the soft sandstone cliffs all those centuries ago. Each set of ruins was marked on our map, so we knew exactly where every ruin was on our way. It's very important to note that no one is allowed to take anything from these sites, which we all followed to the letter. Not only is it extremely illegal and unethical, but each time you summited their ladders and stood inside their catacomb-like mud brick house villages, a heavy presence weighed on you. I'm not sure if it was just the sense of knowing just how ancient those buildings are, or something more supernatural, but I assure you, it always felt like someone, somewhere, would know if you took anything. The hike itself was long and grueling. It was a high desert at the tail end of summer, and we were lugging around dozens of pounds on our backs all day. Every time we passed by a ruin we could all easily reach, we took a short break and explored it. The day passed on like this, uneventful, fun, and tiring, until at least we came upon the backcountry campsite cluster deep in the wilderness. There were several sites to choose from, with each campsite being about 100 yards away from the next. Once I saw the very first campsite, I was immediately adamant that we set up camp there. I really insisted that we set up camp at this particular camping site, but we had the entire campground to choose from, as we were the only ones in there, and my parents wanted a tree for shade to shelter us from the scorching late afternoon desert sun, which this site didn't have. I refused, yet again, this campsite. My parents, and even myself at the time, just thought I wanted that site because it was the first one we came across, and I was whiny and tired. That was definitely true. I was only 7 at the time, but something else drew me to that site. But alas, I was overruled, and on we hiked until we settled into a site with a grand old cottonwood tree. I'm talking this tree was easily over 200 years old. It was so massive. Definitely a tree capable of providing all the shade we could ever need. Its canopy spanned at least 100 feet. We set up camp and settled in as the sun began to wane closer to the western horizon and evening set in. As we all went about our downtime waiting for dinner, I remember a feeling, that sense you get when you're being watched. Sometimes the eyes felt like they were down the trail we came from. Sometimes they were in that large bush 20 feet to your left. Sometimes they felt like they were just over your shoulder. That feeling got so strong in me, I remember asking my parents if they felt it too. Partially to my relief and partially to my disappointment, they also mentioned that they felt eyes on them. My mom was sitting on a rock writing in her notebook about the trip so far, when she looked down at her shoe and saw a $50-sized piece of archaic pottery, deep earthen brown and speckled with an ornate wave-like design pattern. Strange, she thought, and later recounted to me years after this. What's this piece of pottery doing here? There are no ruins nearby. She turned her gaze up beyond the canopy of the cottonwood tree, and there, plain as day, was a set of Anasazi ruins, completely unmarked on our map, probably 100 yards away and 30 feet up the canyon walls, strong like the earth they are made from. Primordial, dried clay dwellings of a bygone era stood steadfast watching over our site. At this point in the day, I was too tired and no longer thrilled at the prospect of investigating another set of ruins to bother exploring this set. I've been in and out of them all day. These surely can't be any different. The sun continued its arc across the sky and soon kissed the western horizon, the eyes never blinking, never looking away the rest of the afternoon. Dinner was served and eaten, and we were treated to a symphony of frog croaks, coyote howls, owl hoots, and bug buzzing that was so loud it was almost deafening. I remember my dad, bathed now in the soft ethereal glow of the moonlight, pretending to be an orchestra conductor, directing the animals of the world in their song of the night. It took the edge off and is one of my favorite memories of the trip. We fell asleep just in our sleeping bags on the ground that night, right underneath the largest branch of the cottonwood tree. There wasn't a cloud in the sky, but the tree would provide us shelter from rain if something unexpected were to happen, and unexpected things did indeed happen. As we were sleeping, that very same branch, hundreds of years old and withstanding all the storms and extreme weathers southern Utah can offer, collapsed. My family and I all woke up to a terrible creaking noise right above us, like a tree in a hurricane, as the wood and branches contort and twist. There was no wind this night, but the branch ached and groaned just the same. We began getting up and moving just as the first splitting noises were heard, followed by a thunderous clap and crash as several tons of wood split from the tree and slammed into the ground where our heads laid just seconds before. Terrifying for sure, but we had no time to react to our near-death experience. The sagebrush and drought-riddled bushes all around our site began rustling violently. Again, there was no breeze here, but dozens of bushes all around us began rattling like hundreds of angry rattlesnakes. For the second time tonight, all of us were deafened. Being the dead of night and definitely out of our logical minds, my parents packed me up, turned on our headlights, and just ran down the trail. Following us down the trail, the once motionless bushes rattled to life as we passed them, heading to another campsite. After what felt like an eternity of being scared absolutely shitless, but in reality was probably 7-10 seconds, we arrived at another campsite. One with no trees or anything, just a large, empty circle. As we entered the campsite, the rustling ceased immediately, and the sounds of the animal orchestra took over, calming, peaceful. After a dozen minutes or so, my dad mustered up the courage to return to our old campsite, to retrieve our sleeping bags, and brought them back to our new haven for the night. We eventually calmed down and fell back asleep. In the morning, I instantly recognized where we were staying. It was the very first campsite on the trail, and the one I was so drawn to. Needless to say, we had a quick breakfast that morning, and we immediately gathered our stuff at the cursed site, preparing to hike back out immediately. As we were packing up what we left in our terror, I looked up to where the ruins that weren't marked on the map were. Instead, all I saw was a painted limestone canyon wall, one that has stood for millions of years and has probably never been touched by humans. Gone were the ruins we saw yesterday. I pulled my dad aside and asked him if he saw the same thing. To my horror, he looked briefly in between packing up the cooking gear and said, "Yep, there's nothing there. They're not there anymore. After last night, that doesn't even surprise me anymore, and I get the feeling we need to leave, so hurry up and help us pack." I get the feeling we need to leave. Yes, that was the feeling I felt this morning. That's another thing that was different. Gone were the watchful eyes, and here now was the feeling of being a trespasser. I obediently began helping my parents pack up camp, and we were back on the trail within the hour. I can happily say that the rest of the trip went fine, and the malicious feeling that consumed the pit of our stomachs dissipated about a mile down the trail. I've always believed in ghosts and spirits, and I could tell that they were pleased to see us be on our way and wouldn't mess with us anymore. Horror is my favorite genre, and I've experienced more possibly supernatural events and have encountered some cryptid-like animals in my travels in the wild since. But this trip was what it took for me to believe that there are forces at play we don't, and probably never will, understand. If any listeners ever get lucky enough to experience the beauty of Cane Gulch in southern Utah, please be respectful. Pack out what you pack in, respect the wildlife, obey trail rules, and perhaps most importantly, make sure you knock and wait for approval before entering someone's house. Even if the person isn't there anymore, they will still know who has trespassed. I've always loved the idea of camping, being out in nature and away from the noise of the city. This one trip, though, it sticks with me in a way I can't shake. It was just me and my old college buddy, Levi Hornsby. Levi had just gone through a rough divorce and needed a break from everything. We decided to take his RV out to a spot in Oregon, near the Umpqua National Forest. Not a well-known camping spot, but it had the seclusion we were looking for. Levi and I met in college. We weren't exactly the studious types, more the kind who'd head out for a beer after class and talk about our next big adventure. Levi's about 6 feet 2 inches, broad shoulders with a laugh that could fill a room. After the divorce, though, he was quieter, more introspective. I thought this trip might bring back the old Levi. We arrived late in the afternoon, the sun casting long shadows through the dense trees. We set up camp quickly, Levi handling the RV hookups while I got a fire going. We were both eager to crack open a few beers and catch up. It was around the fire that Levi told me more about his ex, Kim. Staring into the flames, I missed them, but I needed this, just some time away. I nodded. Yeah, man, sometimes you just need to hit reset. The first night was peaceful, just the sounds of the forest and the crackling fire. We talked about everything and nothing until the fire died down and we turned in. The next day we decided to do some hiking. We packed some sandwiches and water bottles and set off down one of the less traveled trails. The forest was dense, the air cool and fresh. It felt good to stretch our legs and breathe in something other than exhaust fumes. As we walked, we fell into an easy silence, the kind that only old friends can share. We didn't need to fill the space with words. The quiet was nice until it wasn't. We found a clearing about 2 miles in. It was a nice spot to stop and eat our lunch. We were sitting on a couple of rocks just finishing up when Levi frowned. You hear that? I listened but didn't hear anything out of the ordinary. Hear what? Exactly, he said. No birds, no wind. It's like the whole forest just went silent. It was strange. I hadn't noticed until he pointed it out, but he was right. The usual sounds of the forest were gone. We packed up quickly and started back toward camp. It was probably nothing, but it was eerie all the same. That night, as we sat by the fire, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Levi was quieter than usual, too. We called it an early night, hoping to shake the weird vibe by morning. I woke up around midnight to a noise outside the RV. It sounded like something scratching, a soft, persistent sound. I sat up and listened, but it stopped. Figuring it was just a raccoon or something, I lay back down. I was almost asleep again when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, right outside the RV. I sat up again and looked over at Levi. He was still asleep, snoring softly. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly crept to the window. I couldn't see anything out there, but the footsteps continued, circling the RV. My heart was pounding, but I didn't want to wake Levi over what was probably nothing. Still, I kept the flashlight by my side and listened until the footsteps faded into the distance. The next morning, I told Levi about the footsteps. He laughed it off, saying it was probably an animal. I wasn't so sure, but I didn't press it. We decided to take it easy that day, stick around the camp and maybe go fishing. Around noon, a couple of hikers wandered into our campsite. They looked like they'd been out there for a while, dirty and tired. They introduced themselves as Ben and Rachel, said they'd gotten lost, and asked if they could use our map. We handed it over and chatted for a bit. They seemed nice enough, just a bit shaken from their ordeal. Levi and I showed them the right path on the map, and they thanked us before heading off. As they left, Ben turned and said, "We heard some weird noises last night. Thought it was an animal at first, but I don't know, just be careful." That didn't sit well with me. I kept thinking about those footsteps. Levi brushed it off, though. "Don't worry about it. We're out in the middle of nowhere. Of course there's going to be weird noises." I tried to let it go, but that night, the footsteps came back. This time Levi heard them too. We both sat up listening. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, moving around the RV. We grabbed our flashlights and stepped outside. The night was pitch black, the fire reduced to embers. We shone our lights around, but saw nothing. "Hello," Levi called out. No answer. We stood there for a long moment, flashlights scanning the darkness, but the footsteps stopped. We went back inside, but neither of us slept much after that. The next day, we decided to cut the trip short. Something wasn't right. and it was better to be safe than sorry. We started packing up the RV, planning to head out after breakfast. As we were loading up, we heard a scream. It was far off, but it was definitely a scream. We grabbed our gear and ran toward the sound. It didn't take long to find the source. Ben was lying on the ground, his face pale and bloodied. Rachel was nowhere to be seen. "Help," he gasped. It took her. It took Rachel. Levi and I tried to ask him what happened, but he was in shock, barely able to speak. We did what we could to help him, then called for an ambulance. While we waited, he managed to tell us bits and pieces. "We were walking," he said, his voice trembling. "Something came out of the trees. It looked like an animal, but not. It grabbed Rachel and dragged her off." I looked at Levi. His face was as white as Ben's. This wasn't just a weird noise or footsteps. This was something else, something dangerous. The paramedics arrived and took Ben away. We told them what he had said, and they said they'd send a search party for Rachel. Levi and I finished packing up the RV in silence. We didn't need to say it. We both knew it was time to go. We hit the road, the RV bumping along the dirt path. Either of us spoke for a long time. Finally, Levi broke the silence. "What do you think it was?" I shook my head. "I don't know, but it's not something I want to stick around and find out." We drove in silence for a while, the forest thinning out as we got closer to the highway. Just as we were about to breathe a sigh of relief, we saw something in the road, a figure, standing still, watching us. Levi slowed the RV and we both peered out the windshield. The figure was tall, its limbs too long, its eyes reflecting the headlights in a way that no animal's eyes should. It stood there for a moment, then turned and disappeared into the trees. We didn't speak until we hit the highway, the lights of other cars finally making us feel a little safer. We didn't stop until we reached a town, and even then, we didn't talk about what we'd seen. We just wanted to get home. It's been a few months since that trip. Levi is back to his old self mostly. He's been seeing his kids more, trying to move on from the divorce. We haven't talked much about what happened out there, but we don't need to. We both know it's something we'll never forget. Sometimes late at night, I still hear those footsteps. I'll be lying in bed trying to sleep, and I'll hear them, slow and deliberate, moving around the house. I tell myself it's just my imagination, that it's nothing. But deep down I know there's something out there, something that doesn't belong. The authorities never found Rachel. Ben hasn't been the same since. He moved away. Last I heard, trying to put as much distance between himself and those woods as possible. Can't say I blame him. Levi and I made a pact not to go camping again. Once was enough. I still think about that thing we saw, those long limbs and reflective eyes. Sometimes I wonder what it was, where it came from, and why it chose us. Other times I try not to think about it at all. But every now and then, when I'm alone and the night is quiet, I remember those footsteps, and I know that somewhere out there it's still watching. We gave it a name, Levi and I, something to make it feel a little less real. We called it Glimmer. It sounds harmless, almost silly, but we both know better. We know that Glimmer is out there, waiting, watching, biding its time, and that's the scariest part. This happened to me on October 13th, 1986. My name's Christopher Stormrider, 42 years old deputy in the tiny town of Oak Haven, nestled in the foothills of the Ozark Mountains, married to my high school sweetheart, got a little girl loves playing with her dolls and pretends she's a princess. I never thought my biggest worry would be getting back in time for bedtime stories. But that was before the night the thing came whistling through the woods, started with the missing livestock. A couple of goats vanished from Old Man Simmons' farm. Then it was chickens, even a whole calf. No sign of predators, no scat, just clean disappearances. Folks whispered, some old-timer nonsense about the Ozark Howler, a mountain legend about a monstrous creature said to haunt these woods. I figured coyotes, maybe even a poacher straying from his usual territory. Then a hiker went missing. Young kid out on a weekend excursion, car still parked at the trailhead. We mounted a search party, combed the woods for days, found his tattered backpack, some camping gear, but no sign of him. That's when the dread settled in, a prickling at the back of my neck that told me this was no ordinary missing persons case. The next full moon, I was on night patrol driving down a gravel road that bordered the national forest. It was quiet, just the radio crackling. A lone owl hooting somewhere in the distance. That's when I saw it, a hulking shape at the edge of the tree line, silhouetted against the luminous moon. It was massive, moving on all fours with unnatural speed. For a heart-stopping second, I thought it was a bear. But then it reared up on its hind legs, towering at least 7 feet tall, its form both hauntingly familiar, yet horribly distorted. I fumbled for my radio, my voice catching in my throat as I reported the sighting back to the station. Before backup could arrive, the creature turned its head, its eyes gleaming like yellow embers in the darkness. Then it let loose a howl that sent chills down my spine. The sound echoed through the hills, a piercing, mournful cry that was both animal and something far more disturbing. Suddenly it lunged out of the shadows, bounding towards my cruiser. I slammed on the gas and swerved, the tires kicking up gravel as it swiped a massive clawed paw at the rear fender, leaving deep gouges in the metal. I reported my position, trying to keep my voice steady. Shots fired. I repeat, shots fired. I fired my service pistol out the window, more out of desperation than hope of stopping the thing. It roared in fury, the sound making the hairs on my arms stand on end. It started pacing alongside the car, keeping pace effortlessly. The static on the radio became unbearable, cutting off communication with the station. Panic tightened its grip. I was isolated, alone, hurtling down a dark country road with a monster at my heels. Up ahead, a flicker of hope, the lights of Simmons' farm. Flooring it, I aimed the cruiser straight for the old barn, praying for a way through. I slammed into the side of the barn with a deafening crash of shattering wood and screeching metal. The old building shuddered on its foundations, dust choking the air. The cruiser stalled, crumpled, but still in one piece. For a heart-stopping moment, it was silent. I held my breath, fumbling for the shotgun stashed under the seat, the cold weight of it slightly reassuring. Then it started clawing at the wreckage, trying to get in. Scrambling out the passenger side, I ran for the farmhouse, a desperate prayer echoing in my head. Simmons, bless his soul, was already on the porch, ancient rifle in hand. "Get inside, boy," he yelled, his voice hoarse. I dove through the front door just as the creature tore its way through the wreckage of my cruiser. Simmons fired, and I added my shotgun blast to the chaos. It bellowed in rage, momentarily deterred by the gunfire. Simmons ushered me into the house, slamming the heavy oak door and shoving a dresser in front of it for good measure. Mrs. Simmons appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching a crucifix, her face etched with terror. Little Jenny was crying her eyes out, but safe. "It's gonna tear its way in," Simmons said grimly, reloading, "but we'll give him hell first." That night we fought tooth and nail to protect the farmhouse. The creature rampaged outside, its monstrous cries echoing into the pre-dawn darkness. We took turns firing, patching holes in the walls where it tried to break through. At first light, backup finally arrived, a team of deputies along with a few fish and wildlife agents who must have caught wind of the situation. They found the cruiser, a twisted metal testament to the creature's destructive power. But the creature itself was nowhere to be found. We scoured the woods, found shredded tree trunks clawed to the core, its tracks massive and vaguely human-shaped. But the thing itself seemed to have vanished. The aftermath was a mess. The official explanation was a bear attack gone wrong, the hiker presumed tragically lost in the woods. The Simmons family sold their farm, too spooked to stay. The town of Oakhaven got quieter, more watchful, streetlights a little bit brighter, and the shadows at the edge of the woods loomed larger in everyone's minds. I couldn't let it go. Even after the flurry of initial activity died down, I spent my off-duty time scouring old books and records at the county library, digging up any mention of Ozark folklore. I'd lie awake at night, Jenny's princess dolls on the floor replaced by blurry images of those glowing eyes and the mangled remains of my cruiser. The thing was out there, I knew it. The question was, how to stop it. Finally I found it. An old handwritten journal tucked away amongst the dust-covered local history section, an entry penned nearly a century prior, detailing a similar encounter with the same unearthly howl. The journal's author mentioned silver, and an instinct took hold, a sliver of hope in a sea of darkness. I talked to Old Man Walker, the local gunsmith, a cantankerous old coot with a lifetime of Ozark knowledge. "You thinkin' what I think you're thinkin', boy?" he asked after I told him my theory. A few days later, I had a dozen silver-tipped shotgun rounds and a grim sense of purpose. The next full moon, I was back out on that deserted gravel road, parked off to the side with the windows down. The silence of the woods was almost deafening, the air thick with anticipation. My heart hammered in my chest. This was insane, risky. But Jenny's face flashed through my mind, and I knew I had to do this. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then I heard it, the mournful howl slicing through the night, closer this time. I gripped the shotgun, squinting into the forest. There, a pair of glowing eyes fixed on my position. It emerged from the shadows, slowly pacing towards the car, its monstrous form taking shape in the moonlight. The rage I'd been suppressing since that first encounter boiled to the surface. This wasn't just duty anymore, it was personal. It had terrorized my town, taken God knows what, and it was time to make it pay. I leveled the shotgun and fired, the blast echoing through the night. The creature roared but kept coming. I fired again and again, loading the silver rounds with trembling, sweaty hands. It staggered, its fur singed, but its eyes still blazed with terrible fury. I fired one last round, aiming for its head. It let out a blood-curdling shriek, a sound that would haunt my nightmares forever, before collapsing to the ground. Trembling, I got out of my car and slowly approached, shotgun raised, ready to fire again if needed. The creature lay sprawled amidst the fallen leaves, its once powerful form still. I nudged it with my boot, no reaction. I lowered the gun, a wave of dizzying relief washing over me, mixed with a pang of something darker. Back in town, I claimed to have stumbled across a bear carcass, already rotting. They asked no further questions. The Fish and Wildlife folks shipped what was left of the creature to some lab for research. The official reports listed an unknown predator and labeled the case closed. After that night, the disappearances stopped. The palpable sense of fear in Oak Haven began to dissipate over time. Folks went back to leaving their doors unlocked every now and then, though I noticed they glanced over their shoulders a bit more often when venturing near the woods. I became something of a local legend, Deputy Cole, who stared down the Ozark howler. But some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, hearing that monstrous howl echoing in my ears. I see the yellow eyes, the shredded metal of my cruiser, and I remember the terrifying power of the creature I faced. Jenny grew up, had kids of her own. Some days I catch a glimpse of those glowing eyes reflected in my grandchildren's when they're playing in the woods near my cabin. It sends an icy shiver down my spine. My shotgun is always cleaned and loaded, resting by the back door. The silver rounds sit in a worn leather pouch on my dresser, grim reminders of that moonlit night. Sometimes I patrol the boundary of the woods more out of habit than necessity. Old Man Walker is long gone, but his son now runs the gunsmith shop. Stops by now and again, always makes sure my supply of silver rounds is topped up. We don't speak much about it, just share a knowing look. The Ozark howler, the legend persists on the fringes of campfire tales. I never correct the stories. Let them think what they want. I know the truth, the terrible reality that lurks on the edge of our awareness. The folks in Oak Haven sleep a bit easier not knowing, and I'll stand guard as long as I'm able. Against the day, the shadows once again stir with monstrous life and that echoing howl. I pressed my face against the cool glass, my eyes scanning the swaying treetops. The radio crackled beside me, a reminder of civilization's distant hum. Yet here in my tower perched upon the Smoky Mountains' rugged shoulders, I was a visitor to an older world. By day it was all nature's tranquility, by night an inky abyss. 3 months performing this role, and each evening held its own eerie calm. But tonight felt different. Thicker air, barely a leaf fluttering. I'm Mercer Smith, and being a fire lookout was meant to be uneventful. That is until 2 nights ago when radio channels erupted with frantic chatter about missing hikers. The local police, Mabel Haskins, a woman known for her stern eye but kind heart, informed me about a suspect on the loose. A creature of flesh and blood, nothing more. just some feral man living off the grid they suspected had gone rogue after years of isolation. Tapping my pen against the logbook, I recorded nothing of note. That was until a rustle below caught my attention. My pulse spiked as the sound clawed closer, a shuffling gait through dry leaves, cunningly quiet yet undeniably present. I reached for my binoculars. Their lenses brought the forest into sharp contrast against the moonlit sky. Darting eyes caught no movement save for a shadow that seemed out of place. A figure? No. It was too big to be human. Steeled by routine checks and drills, I began descending from my perch to investigate when it should have been wiser to stay put. Each step on the creaking stairs tightened my stomach into knots. My name branded these woods as much as it did back in Albany, where my ex-wife now barely remembered it, whispered on her lips. At ground level, with only trees for company and no sign of the intruder, a chilling realization struck me. I was tracking this entity under its rules now. A chill ran up despite the lack of wind, not from fear but from understanding. Am I not prey when I'm sharing space with an unseen hunter? Jokes about missing socks or misplaced keys seemed lost in these woods where laughter didn't belong. Out here you had to find humor in gulps of fearless air, or defiantly growling at shadows that weren't your own. All at once, it felt as though every creature held its breath, waiting for me to spot what they already knew lurked nearby. Through murky silence and crackle of underbrush, tension strung between trees like spider silk waiting to strike. Advancing with minimal sound myself, I spotted signs. An overturned stone here or there, etched with marks that weren't natural erosion, but something deliberate. A clue, no doubt, but leading where? A guttural snarl froze my footsteps. All senses strained now towards a point just beyond sight, but definitely within reach, if one were mindless enough to approach unarmed and alone. Years of service flare muted alarms inside me, warning not to progress into what's both known and unknown at once. What compels us towards dark corners, promising nothing but truths we're unprepared for. Decided on hasty departure, leaving just you and it. Whatever it is exactly, this creature defined by absence rather than form, looming between perception and reality's fragile divide. I retreated each step, measured my attention, sharpened to the threat that seemed to pulse with the forest's rhythm. I reached for my phone, fingers clumsy with haste. No signal isolation enveloped me more than ever. Technology's lifeline severed by sheer remoteness. A crack to my right. My gaze snapped toward the sound, eyes piercing the dimming light to catch fleeting movement. A hulking form concealed yet barely by foliage. Massive, the silhouette towered, shoulders broad and daunting. It moved with a predator's grace, every step calculated. Muscles rolling beneath a mottled hide that whispered of cruelty and wildness untouched by civilization. Claws, dirt-stained and fearsome as daggers, dug into the earth, signs of power harnessed in sinew and bone. It unleashed a roar, an epithet that shook leaves from their branches. The sound guttural, primeval, a declaration of dominion over these woods. My legs gave way, not due to surrender but strategy. Diving behind a downed trunk, just as those claws shredded the space I had occupied moments before, I crab-walked backward, boots pressing grooves into soft earth as I moved away. The creature stalked forward, its pace relentless, its intent clear in the narrowing of its ember-like eyes. A burly ranger emerged onto the path ahead, a rifle cradled in his arms, a beacon of human resilience against nature's dark child. "Get behind me," he barked. We edged away together, silence our unspoken covenant, broken only by twigs crushed underfoot in a creature's breaths that painted pictures of unyielding hunger. Safety found me under fluorescence at the station later. My statements spilled across paper like ink blots, telling tales too ancient for urban life to decipher. Days passed. No one ventured into those woods without caution's shadow as their follower. The creature claimed no victims from then on. Perhaps it lingered as a sentry watching from darkness. We never forgot, though, the nature's untamed heart, beating within our own civilization's confines. The RV was our little escape. My buddy Craig and I had been taking these trips for years. He's the kind of guy who always has the best camping gear and knows all the off-the-beaten-path spots. This time we headed to a place in the deep woods of northern Michigan. It was late fall, and the leaves were a mix of deep reds and golds, the air just crisp enough to need a jacket. We parked the RV in a small clearing near an old, rarely used trail. The first couple of days were just like any other trip. We fished in the nearby lake, hiked the trails, and spent our nights around the campfire, laughing about old stories. It was peaceful, away from the hustle of the city. One evening we decided to check out an abandoned cabin Craig had read about online. It was supposed to be about a mile hike from our spot, deeper into the woods. The sun was starting to set, but we figured we had enough daylight left. Besides, Craig had his flashlight and I had my phone. The cabin was a wreck, moss-covered and falling apart. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. We poked around, finding nothing but some old furniture and a lot of dust. I was about to suggest heading back when Craig called out from another room. "Hey Logan, come check this out." He was standing by an old rusted metal door that led to a cellar. It took both of us to get it open. Inside there was a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Craig, always the adventurous one, insisted we go down. "You sure about this?" I asked, feeling a bit uneasy. "Come on, man, what's the worst that could happen?" Craig replied with a grin. The cellar was damp and smelled like mold. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing a few old crates and what looked like an animal skeleton in one corner. Then we found something that sent chills through me, a set of rusty shackles attached to the wall. Craig looked at me, his excitement fading a bit. "This is messed up," I muttered. We didn't stay long after that. Climbing back up, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The sun had set by the time we emerged, and the forest around us was cloaked in shadows. We made our way back to the RV in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. That night we tried to laugh off the weirdness over a few beers by the campfire, but the mood had shifted. Craig suggested we head back to the cabin the next day, maybe bring some better lights, but I wasn't so sure. The next morning I woke up to find Craig gone. His sleeping bag was empty and his boots were missing. I figured he'd gone for an early morning hike, something he often did. But by midday there was still no sign of him. I started to worry. Craig was always back by lunchtime. I grabbed my flashlight and a knife just in case and set out to look for him. I followed the trail we had taken to the cabin. Halfway there I found one of Craig's boots lying in the middle of the path. It was covered in something dark, and I didn't want to think about what it might be. "Craig," I shouted, my voice echoing through the trees. There was no answer. I reached the cabin, but there was no sign of him. The cellar door was still open, and I felt a cold dread as I stared down into the darkness. I forced myself to go down the stairs, but the cellar was empty, just as we had left it. Back outside, I found more of his other boot, a torn piece of his jacket. It was like he had been dragged away. Panic started to set in. I had no idea what to do. I ran back to the RV, hoping he had somehow returned while I was gone, but it was empty. I grabbed the radio and tried to call for help, but the signal was weak. "My friend is missing and I need help." Static was my only reply. I spent the next few hours searching the woods, calling out his name until my voice was hoarse. Just as I was about to give up and head back to the RV, I heard a noise, a rustling in the bushes behind me. I turned, shining my flashlight, and caught a glimpse of something moving. It was fast. Too fast to be an animal. "Craig," I called out, my heart pounding. There was no answer, but the rustling continued, moving closer. I gripped the knife tightly, backing away slowly. Suddenly, something charged at me from the darkness, knocking me to the ground. I struggled, kicking and swinging the knife blindly. Whatever it was strong and heavy, and I could feel its claws tearing into my flesh. I managed to stab it, and it let out a terrible screech before retreating into the woods. I scrambled to my feet, bleeding and shaking, and ran back to the RV as fast as I could. I locked the door behind me, my heart racing. I grabbed the first aid kit and did my best to patch myself up, but the wounds were deep. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, knife in hand, listening for any sound. The woods were eerily quiet. As dawn approached, I decided I needed to get out of there. Craig was still missing, but I couldn't stay. Whatever was out there, I wasn't equipped to deal with it. I packed up what I could, threw it into the RV, and started the engine. As I drove away, I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see something chasing me. But there was nothing. Back in town, I went straight to the police. They organized a search party, but they didn't find anything. No sign of Craig, no sign of a struggle, nothing. They treated me like I was crazy, but I know what I saw, what I felt. Weeks passed and the search was called off, presumed dead. His family blamed me, and I couldn't blame them. I blamed myself too. I moved away, tried to forget, but the nightmares never stopped. I could still feel the weight of that thing on top of me, its claws digging into my skin. I did some research trying to find out what it could have been, but I never found a clear answer. Some locals had stories about strange creatures in the woods, tales of people going missing, but nothing concrete. One name kept coming up, though, in the old folklore, Gorgle. They said it was a creature that hunted in the night, taking people who wandered too far into the woods. I don't know if that's what it was, but it's the only name I have. Now every time I see an RV or hear about someone planning a camping trip, I want to warn them. I want to tell them to stay away from those woods, but I don't, because who would believe me? Craig was my best friend, and I lost him to something I can't even explain. I can still see his smile, hear his laugh, but I can't bring him back. All I can do is remember, and hope that no one else has to face Gorgle. My name is Tatanka Braveheart, and I am 41 years old. And this happened to me in 1987. I was a simple guy, working as a park ranger in the Shawnee National Forest in southern Illinois. I liked the quiet life, living in my cabin with my dog, Buck. I was part of the Cherokee Nation, proud of my heritage, but living a life that most would consider pretty ordinary. It was early summer, and the forest was alive with the sounds of birds and the rustling of leaves. The days were long, and my job mainly involved making sure hikers and campers followed the rules and helping out if anyone got lost or into trouble. Not the most exciting job, but it was peaceful, and I loved the forest. One evening, just as the sun was starting to set, I got a call on the radio. A group of campers had gone missing near Garden of the Gods, a popular spot known for its unique rock formations. I grabbed my gear, whistled for Buck, and headed out. The trail was familiar, and we moved quickly. By the time we reached the campsite, it was dark. The place was a mess, tents ripped, belongings scattered, and no sign of the campers. I radioed in and started a search pattern with Buck. He was a good tracker and could usually find people quickly. As we moved deeper into the forest, I felt a strange sense of unease. The forest was too quiet. Even the usual sounds of nocturnal animals were absent. Buck started acting nervous. His ears pinned back, and he kept looking over his shoulder. I tried to shake off the feeling and focused on the search. We found the first body about a mile from the campsite. It was one of the campers, a young guy named Mark. His throat was slashed, and his eyes were wide open, frozen in terror. I radioed in the find, feeling a cold knot of fear in my stomach. This wasn't a bear or a mountain lion. This was something else, a low, menacing sound. He was looking into the darkness, hackles raised. I followed his gaze but saw nothing. We continued the search, finding 2 more bodies, both women, both killed in the same brutal manner. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something was out here, something dangerous. I heard a rustle behind me and spun around, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. Buck barked, a sharp warning sound. There, standing in the beam of light, was a figure. It was tall, humanoid, but not quite right. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes glowed faintly in the dark. It had long, thin limbs and fingers that ended in sharp claws. I raised my rifle, aiming at the creature. "Who are you? What do you want?" I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. The creature didn't respond. It just stood there, staring at me with those eerie eyes. Buck lunged forward, barking furiously. The creature moved within human speed, swiping at Buck with its claws. Buck yelped and fell, bleeding from a deep gash. I fired my rifle, the shot echoing through the trees. The creature screeched, a high-pitched, bone-chilling sound, and disappeared into the darkness. I ran to Buck, who was whimpering in pain. I tore off my jacket and used it to staunch the bleeding, my hands shaking. I needed to get him back to the cabin fast. I lifted him as gently as I could and started the long trek back, my heart pounding in my chest. The forest seemed even more sinister now, every shadow a potential threat. I moved as quickly as I could, constantly checking over my shoulder. We made it back to the cabin and I barricaded the door, praying it would be enough. I did my best to tend to Buck's wounds, but he was in bad shape. I radioed for help, but the signal was weak. I could only hope someone heard me. I spent the night keeping watch, my rifle in my lap, waiting for the creature to return. Dawn broke, and with it came a search party. They found me, haggard and exhausted, with Buck barely hanging on. They took us both to the nearest town, where Buck received medical attention and I gave my report. No one believed me about the creature. They chalked it up to stress and exhaustion, saying the campers were likely killed by a rogue animal. But I knew what I saw. I knew it wasn't a bear or a mountain lion. It was something else, something that didn't belong in this world. I took some time off after that, trying to process what had happened. Buck recovered, but he was never the same. He was always on edge, always watching the shadows. I couldn't blame him. I felt the same way. I started researching local legends and folklore, trying to find any clue as to what that creature might have been. I came across stories of the Wendigo, a creature from Native American mythology, but it didn't quite fit. The Wendigo was a spirit of the North, and we were far from its traditional territory. Still, it was the closest thing I could find. Life slowly returned to normal, but I never forgot that night. I stayed vigilant, always aware of my surroundings, always ready for the day when the creature might return. The forest was my home, but it was also a place of danger, a place where the lines between our world and the unknown could blur. And the memory of that night became a distant, haunting echo. I continued my work as a park ranger, but I was always cautious, always prepared. The Shawnee National Forest was a place of beauty and wonder, but it was also a place of mystery, a place where the unknown could reach out and touch you when you least expected it. One day, many years later, a group of hikers went missing in the same area. I was older now, more experienced, but the fear and dread came rushing back. I led the search party, my heart heavy with the memory of that night. We found their campsite, and it was the same as before. Tents ripped, belongings scattered, no sign of the hikers. My hands shook as I radioed in the report, the past merging with the present in a terrifying déjà vu. We searched for hours, finding nothing but more signs of a struggle. I felt that same eerie silence, the same absence of animal sounds. Buck had long passed away, but I could almost hear his growl in my mind, warning me. As night fell, I saw it again, the creature standing just beyond the reach of our flashlights. It hadn't aged a day. It looked exactly the same, with those glowing eyes and sharp claws. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. The rest of the team saw it too this time. They opened fire, the night erupting with the sound of gunshots. The creature screeched and vanished into the darkness, just as it had before. We didn't find the hikers, only more bodies, their faces frozen in terror. The forest was closed to the public after that, declared unsafe due to a rogue predator. But I knew the truth. It wasn't an animal. It was something else. Something that defied explanation. Something that still haunted my dreams. I retired not long after, moving to a small town far from the forest. I couldn't stay there, not after everything that had happened. I tried to live a normal life, but the memories always lingered, a dark shadow over my peace. I never found out what the creature was. The stories and legends gave me some ideas, but nothing concrete. It was just a mystery, one that I would take to my grave, but every now and then I'd hear about another disappearance, another unexplained death in the forest, and I'd know it was still out there, still hunting. I don't tell this story often. Most people wouldn't believe me anyway. But if you ever find yourself in the Shawnee National Forest, be careful. Stick to the trails, and don't stay out after dark, because there's something out there, something that doesn't belong, and if you're not careful, it might find you too. This happened to me on June 17th, 2015, a bit after midnight. My name's Nicholas Riverblood, 31 years old, and I've been the chief of police here in Braxton, Georgia for over 2 decades now. I used to think I'd seen it all during my time on the force, But that night was different. Braxton is just a small town and things are generally quiet around here. Folks know each other and there's rarely serious trouble. I've responded to the occasional domestic dispute, broken up some drunken brawls, settled neighborly feuds, the typical small-town police stuff. I was on patrol that night, mostly to deter any troublemakers passing through Braxton. I was driving on the old highway, running through the woods just outside town limits. The stretch of road is dark and isolated, and I've always felt uneasy driving it at night. Suddenly, my headlights caught something large and pale darting across the road up ahead. I slammed on the brakes, swerving the police cruiser to a halt. What the hell was that? I muttered to myself. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously stepped out of the vehicle. I swept the beam of the flashlight across the road and into the trees, trying to see whatever it was. The air was thick and humid, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, a musky animal odor. My heart quickened. I'd hunted this area since I was a boy, and I didn't recognize that smell. A shiver of unease ran down my spine. Then I heard it, a low growl rumbling through the darkness. I raised the flashlight higher, scanning the line of trees, and that's when I saw them. 2 eyes, large and yellow. I froze, the hair on my arm standing on end. The eyes moved closer, and I caught a glimpse of the creature. It was massive, at least 7 feet tall, hunched over on powerful hind legs. Its skin was leathery and grayish-white, devoid of fur. Its face, I still have nightmares about its face. It was long and narrow, with rows of sharp teeth protruding from a wide mouth. Its eyes burned with a predatory intelligence. I stumbled back to the cruiser, my hand fumbling for my gun. I managed to get the car door open and throw myself inside. I slammed it shut, frantically locking the doors and rolling up the windows. The creature charged out of the woods, its speed astonishing. It slammed against the side of my cruiser, the force making the whole vehicle rock violently. Panic surged through me as I fumbled with the keys, my fingers clumsy with fear. The engine roared to life and I stomped on the gas pedal, the tires squealing as I swerved the car around. Looking into the rearview mirror, I saw the creature pursuing me, its elongated form bounding through the woods in terrifying leaps. I pushed the accelerator to the floor, the police cruiser straining as I sped down the old highway. The creature easily kept pace, its relentless yellow eyes visible in the darkness. I reached for the police radio, my voice trembling as I called for backup. Roger Wilborn to dispatch. I need immediate assistance on the old highway outside of town. I'm in pursuit of... I don't know what the hell it is. It's big, damn fast, and it's hostile. Send everyone available. I didn't wait for a response. I floored the gas pedal, adrenaline coursing through me. The creature was gaining ground. I could see its massive form closing in, its claws scraping against the pavement as it ran. Ahead of me loomed the dark silhouette of Johnson's old sawmill, its rusted machinery and dilapidated buildings casting long shadows under the pale moonlight. A desperate plan formed in my mind. I aimed the cruiser toward the sawmill entrance and onto the dirt path leading to the abandoned buildings. I knew the place like the back of my hand. If I could lure the creature inside, I might have a chance to trap it, or at least slow it down. Just as I reached the main sawmill building, shots rang out. Deputy Hicks and Deputy Moore had arrived. Their headlights pierced the darkness, and I could see them firing their rifles at the creature as it lunged toward my car. The creature snarled, temporarily distracted by the gunfire. I used the opportunity to slam the cruiser through the double doors of the main sawmill building. Screeching to a halt inside, I jumped out of the car and rushed toward a control panel near a large rusted piece of machinery. A deafening howl echoed through the sawmill as the creature charged inside, the deputy's headlights illuminating its nightmarish form. I threw the switch on the control panel, activating an old conveyor system that ran through the building. Heavy metal hooks dangled from a chain snaking overhead. My plan was risky, a desperate gamble. If I could time it right, I might be able to snare the creature on the hooks, immobilizing it long enough for the deputies to subdue it, or kill it. The creature was closing in, its eyes blazing with fury. I yelled at the deputies to fall back, to give me space. They retreated, their gunfire echoing eerily within the sawmill. Taking a deep breath, I waited for the creature to get within range. Its massive form lunged toward me. I flipped another switch. The conveyor belt jolted into motion, the hook swinging dangerously close to the creature. It roared and twisted, its claws narrowly avoiding the first hook. Another hook swung by, slashing across its flank and drawing a shriek of pain. I flipped the switch again, reversing the conveyor belt's direction. The hooks now moved toward the creature. It snarled and thrashed, but its momentum carried it inexorably closer. A hook snagged its shoulder, tearing at its leathery hide. The creature stumbled, its movements momentarily hindered. Another hook sank into its torso, suspending it partially in the air. I rushed toward the creature, gun drawn, with the deputies close behind. The creature thrashed violently, trying to free itself from the hooks. It bellowed in rage, its guttural roar filling the sawmill. I aimed my gun, but then it did something that made my blood run cold. It turned its baleful gaze towards me, and a sound escaped its throat. A sound that chilled me to the bone. It was almost like laughter. A shot rang out, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. I flinched, but the creature seemed unfazed. Another shot and another echoed from behind me as Hicks and Moore fired upon the suspended beast. It twisted and thrashed against its restraints, streaks of blood flying from its wounds. For a moment it seemed like we had it. The creature was bleeding heavily, and the hooks held it fast. A surge of hope flared within me. Maybe we could end this nightmare right here, right now. But then, with a deafening shriek, it pulled. The metal hooks ripped through its flesh, tearing and shredding with a wet, gruesome sound. The creature crashed to the ground with a heavy thud. It snarled at us, baring its dripping fangs, rage filling its eyes. Hicks and Moore backed away, startled and horrified. I had never seen a creature fight like this, driven by a ferocity that bordered on something unnatural. "Reloading," Hicks shouted, fumbling for another clip. I fired again, aiming for its head. The bullet struck it, but seemed to only enrage it further. It surged toward me, its clawed hands outstretched. I barely had time to duck as it slammed into the spot where I'd just been standing. The force threw me off my feet, my gun skittering across the floor. I scrambled backward, my heart pounding against my ribs. Pain spiked through my shoulder as I slammed it against a stack of old lumber, jagged pieces of wood digging into my skin. The creature was closing in. I could smell its foul breath, hot and rancid. Desperation clawed at my throat. My eyes darted around the sawmill, searching for anything I could use, anything that could buy me some time. That's when I saw it. A rusty old axe embedded in a beam near the conveyor belt controls. With a surge of adrenaline, I scrambled to my feet. The creature charged, a blur of claws and teeth. I lunged for the axe, ripping it from the wood with a grunt. The creature was upon me. I raised the axe high and swung with all my strength. The blade bit deep into its side, lodging there with sickening crack. The creature howled in pain and fury, momentarily stunned. Hicks and Moore, now reloaded, resumed firing. Their bullets pummeled the beast, shredding its flesh, splattering its unnatural blood across the floor. It roared and staggered, struggling to shake off the onslaught. I saw my chance. With a surge of reckless desperation, I ran at the creature, the axe still in hand. It whipped its head towards me, those yellow eyes narrowing in hate. I swung again. This time the axe struck true, cleaving through its skull with a sickening thud. The creature's roar cut off abruptly. Its massive frame shuddered, then collapsed to the sawdust-littered floor. Silence fell over the sawmill, heavy and oppressive. I leaned against a nearby support beam, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Hicks and Moore cautiously approached the creature's unmoving body, weapons still raised. Is it dead?" Moore asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. I nodded slowly, unable to speak. We stood there in stunned silence for a long moment, staring down at the carcass of the monstrosity. Its death finally seemed real, yet even in its stillness, it exuded an aura of menace. The aftermath was a blur. More backup arrived, securing the sawmill and surrounding area. News crews descended upon Braxton, hungry for any information about the creature. The higher-ups, the FBI and others, arrived to take over the investigation. They took our statements, examined the scene, and eventually carted away the creature's carcass. Its exact nature was never officially determined. They labeled it an unknown species, a cryptid, and tried to sweep the whole incident under the rug. But you can't hide the truth forever, especially not in a small town like Braxton. Stories of the night I killed the monster spread like wildfire. There were whispers, rumors, hushed conversations behind closed doors. Some folks called me a hero. Others, they looked at me with fear in their eyes, like I'd become tainted from my encounter with the beast. The experience changed me, that's for damn sure. I'm not the same man I was when I took this job all those years ago. Even now I see it in my dreams, the creature's leathery, hairless form, its burning eyes, the sharp stained rows of its teeth, and that damned laughter that will haunt me until my dying day. I still sometimes think I hear it echoing in the woods at night. In the years since that night, more strange sightings were reported around Braxton. There's talk of other creatures lurking in those woods, creatures like the one I killed. Some nights when the fog hangs heavy over the old highway and the woods whisper secrets into the wind, I can't help but think that something still lingers out there in the darkness. Waiting, watching. I still patrol that old stretch of highway. Some call it foolish, some call it brave. Me, I call it duty. This is my town, and I'll be damned if something like that is going to run wild on my watch. Whatever else is out there, I'll be ready. I have to be. This happened to me in 1999. My name's Silas Rathburn. Worked for the Park Service since I was a kid, summers mostly. Figured I'd make a career of it. My old man, he ran a bait shop, said I had rocks in my head. Guess he was right. Got assigned to the Desolation Wilderness after a few years bouncing around. Sierra Nevada range. Beautiful, unforgiving. You learn to respect the quiet up there, respect the fact that you're not at the top of the food chain. It was late August, haze from a wildfire down south hanging in the air. I was on patrol, more about checking campsites, making sure folks had bare canisters and weren't doing anything stupid. Found a couple kids smoking something that sure wasn't tobacco, gave them a warning. Not much else to it, until I hit Granite Lake. Trail skirts the western edge. I was a good mile in when I saw it. First thought it was a bear, crouched over something. Got closer. Wasn't no bear. Thing was hunched over, digging at the ground with its hands. Long limbs, all muscle and sinew, skinned the color of dried earth. It had hair but patchy, like it had been shedding. Head was small, almost delicate compared to the rest of it. Couldn't make out any features the way it was hunched over. Dumb. I know it was dumb, but I called out, "Hey, you all right there?" The thing stopped digging. It moved so fast I barely registered it turning. 1 minute it was hunched over, the next it was standing looking right at me. That's when I saw its face. No nose to speak of, just 2 slits. Eyes were big, black, no white showing. Mouth was a gash across its lower face, lips pulled back in a permanent snarl. And teeth. Christ, the teeth. Long, yellowed, some of them chipped or broken. My hand went to my holster, but I knew it was useless. The thing moved like a striking snake, one moment there, the next on top of me. I remember the stink of it like wet fur and rot. Remember the teeth sinking into my shoulder, the pain that drove everything else out of my head. It was the scream that saved me, not mine. The thing, it let out this shriek, high-pitched, almost like a bird of prey. Then it was gone, vanished into the trees as quick as it had appeared. I lay there, blood soaking my shirt, convinced I was going to die. But I didn't. Managed to patch myself up enough to limp back to the ranger station. Called it in. Bear attack, that's what I told them. What else was I supposed to say? A monster? They'd have locked me up. They airlifted me out. Spent a week in the hospital. Shoulder still aches when it rains. They never found anything, no sign of a bear attack. Closed the case, said it was probably a cougar. But I knew what I saw. Went back to work, couldn't afford not to. But I'm not the same. Can't sleep right. Keep seeing those eyes in the dark. Every time I go out on patrol, I feel it watching me. Waiting. They found a body a few weeks back. Hiker. Torn to shreds like something had been at it with its bare hands. Found it near Granite Lake. They're calling it an animal attack, but I know better. I know what's out there. Something hungry. Something not right. And it's still out there. hadn't expected my year stationed as a fire lookout in Idaho's remote Selway Bitterroot Wilderness to pry open the doors to a dormant fear. My name is Ethan Eagleclaw, 28 years old. Amongst my new colleagues at the base, I was known simply by my radio call sign, Tango Bravo. It started one crisp October morning when the air bit with a hint of winter's chill. As part of my daily routine, I scanned the horizon through my binoculars from my tower perch. Not a wisp of smoke marred the view, just endless waves of ancient trees swaying softly. But there it was, an anomaly in the natural order, a series of peculiar marks scarring a patch of ground through my binoculars. I kept meticulous logs and reported everything out of the norm. But wasn't this just slightly too curious for a simple note? I shrugged on my parka and decided to investigate personally, a decision that would become lightning rod for what was to come. Navigating through the dense woods grew more laborious as I neared the marks. They were unlike any animal tracks I'd ever seen, deep imprints that suggested something sizable, yet without discernible pattern or rhythm. The sun dipped low as I stood amidst the clearing where I had seen the mysterious indentations, but an uneasy realization crept in. They weren't tracks, but deliberate gouges in earth, something vehemently clawed at the ground here. And within these furrows lay remnants, odd items, a charred half-burnt identification card, pieces of what seemed like broken tools, each belonging perhaps to prior wilderness stewards like myself. Days passed since that discovery, with restless nights spent pondering their origin and intent. Even among fellow lookouts like Corinna Stonefield and Lennox Judd, whose experiences outweighed mine by decades, mentions of such markings only fetched puzzled stares or chuckles. "Mountain lions get inventive sometimes," Corinna quipped over radio one dusk, trying to inject levity into my unease. But humor soon deserted us all. A week later came another report signaling disquiet. 2 backpackers missing along one trail close to my tower sector. An exhaustive search ensued, with dogs and volunteers combing through thickets and creeks without so much as a trail sign. Then, on a day blisteringly clear, where blue sky seemed unsettlingly infinite above an indifferent forest expanse below, the grounding crunch underfoot halted all motion. Ensnared by thorny underbrush lay personal belongings, a wallet, a torn backpack strap, artifacts of someone's interrupted voyage into these quiet wilds. The other lookouts and I coordinated with authorities better equipped than us for forensics or searches beyond lost hiker scenarios. Yet our tight-knit collective couldn't shake off gloom that settled thereafter like mist-shackling mountain peaks at dawn. After the discovery of the abandoned gear, a sense of duty fell upon me. I radioed the authorities, giving them precise coordinates and what little information I had. "Dispatch, this is Tower 4. Possible evidence found at location Delta Charlie 145, requesting immediate investigation, over." The response was swift. "Roger that, Tower 4, sending a team to your location. Ensure your safety and do not engage, over." I acknowledged and secured myself within my lookout as night approached. I could see the flashlights of the rescue team far below as they moved through the undergrowth. Hours passed with radio updates fading into static, until a brief message broke through, urgent and clipped. "Tower 4, containment breach at search site. Alert, creature, large, bear or larger. Multiple casualties. Assistance required, fallback 2. Static took over. Dawn broke with no further contact. I scanned the horizon for any sign of movement, but saw none. Finally, radio chatter resumed. The search team had suffered attacks with serious injuries reported among their ranks. Rescue operations had turned into a recovery mission. I stayed indoors, watching anxiously as more personnel arrived below. They grouped in formation, moving with purposeful haste, but not before somberly carrying stretchers covered in blood-stained cloth. It was then clear not all had survived the night. Through binoculars, I caught glimpses of the aftermath, trees torn apart at great height, deep furrows in the earth resembling no animal activity I knew. Lennox came through on the radio with heavy news. "Tower 4, this is Lennox at Tower 2. Corinna didn't make it through the night." Days became silent after that incident. We were advised to keep towers locked down after dusk and maintain vigilance during daylight. I followed orders meticulously, without venture for closer encounters. As autumn waned to winter, reports surfaced of an elusive creature not known to reside here, something unnaturally large and formidable, capable of inflicting horrors that matched those tragic nights. with each chilling account from rangers from adjacent sectors converging on our location, backed by what I witnessed from my high vantage point of safety, furrows in earth and mangled flora. Certainty dawned that something lurked within these woods beyond our understanding or control. And as snow began to fall silently on an eerily calm forest, somewhere in that stillness it roamed free, unseen but ever present. This happened to me in 1999. The name's Tommy Little Crow. Most folks know me as the guy who runs the fishing charters on the Lower Brule Reservation, out on the Missouri River. Grew up here, learned the ways of the water from my grandpa. He always said the river held stories older than the hills themselves. He was right. Late summer of '99, things were heating up. Not just the weather, though it was hotter than a fry bread on a skillet. The Y2K bug had everyone on edge, worried their microwaves were going to turn on them come midnight. Me, I figured it was just white man superstition, like Friday the 13th. Still, there was a tension in the air, a feeling like something was brewing. One day, a couple of city slickers, Hank and they, were all smiles and khaki shorts, fresh off the plane from Chicago. Talked about wanting to catch some walleye, maybe even a catfish. I took them out on my boat, a sturdy aluminum thing I called the Warrior. We spent the morning trolling the river, the sun beating down on us. Hank and Dale were getting restless. "Where are all the fish?" Hank asked more than once. "Patience, friend," I'd say. "The river gives when it's good and ready." Finally, Dale hooked something big. His rod bent double, and the line sang as it cut through the water. He wrestled with it for a good 10 minutes before hauling a massive catfish onto the boat. "Holy smokes," Hank exclaimed, snapping pictures with his disposable camera. Just as we were celebrating, I saw it. A ripple in the water, not from a fish, but something much larger. I cut the engine and we drifted, the silence broken only by the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull. Then it rose from the depths. It was humanoid, but that's where the resemblance to anything human ended. It was at least 8 feet tall, covered in algae and river muck. Its skin was a sickly green, stretched taut over bulging muscles. Its eyes, black as coal, seemed to bore into my soul. Hank and Dale were frozen in fear. I grabbed my gaff, a heavy hook used to land big fish, and prepared to defend myself. But the creature didn't attack. It just stared at us, its gaze unwavering. Suddenly it let out a shriek that chilled me to the bone. It was a sound like 1,000 banshees wailing in unison, echoing across the water. Hank and Dale screamed and jumped overboard, their cries for help swallowed by the river's murky depths. I was alone with the creature. It turned its attention to me, its eyes burning with an unnatural hunger. I swung the gaff, catching it in the side. It roared in pain and swatted me aside like a fly. I hit the railing, my ribs cracking under the impact. The creature reached for me, its long, gnawed fingers dripping with slime. I managed to crawl away, my body racked with pain. I grabbed a flare gun from the emergency kit and fired it at the creature. The flare exploded in a shower of sparks, blinding the creature momentarily. I used the distraction to scramble back to the helm and fire up the engine. I sped away, not daring to look back. I searched for Hank and Dale, but they were gone, swallowed by the river's darkness. I returned to the reservation, my body battered and bruised, my mind reeling from the encounter. I told the tribal elders what I had seen, but they dismissed it as a drunken hallucination. I knew they were wrong, but I couldn't prove it. News of the missing fishermen spread, and the authorities launched a search. They dragged the river for days, but found no trace of Hank or Dale. The case went cold, another unsolved mystery in the annals of the reservation's history. The encounter with the creature changed me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen something ancient and evil, a being from the depths of time. I began researching local legends and folklore, seeking answers to the mystery. I found stories of a creature called Unk'thi, a water monster that inhabited the Missouri River. It was said to be a shapeshifter, capable of taking on the form of a serpent or a giant buffalo. Some stories even claimed that it could disguise itself as a human. I spent the rest of that summer and the following fall obsessively searching the river, driven by a need to understand what I had seen. I found nothing concrete, but the stories and rumors I heard only fueled my obsession. As winter approached, the river froze over and the search was called off. I returned to my daily life trying to forget the incident, but the memory lingered, a dark cloud hanging over me. One evening, as I was closing up the bait shop I ran, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the dock. It was tall and gaunt, its silhouette familiar yet unsettling. I grabbed my gaff and cautiously approached. As I drew closer, I recognized the creature. It was the same one from the river, but now it was wearing human clothes, a tattered coat and a pair of worn-out boots. It turned to face me, its eyes burning with an eerie light. "You," it rasped, its voice a guttural growl. "You have seen me. You know my secret." I raised the gaff ready to strike, but the creature held up its hand, a gesture of peace. "I mean you no harm," it said. "I am Unkhthi, the water spirit. I have been watching you." I was speechless. The creature, the monster, was talking to me. "I need your help," Unkhthi continued. "The river is dying. The white man's poisons are polluting it, killing the fish and the plants. I am growing weak." I listened, my heart pounding in my chest. I had always respected the river, considered it sacred. I couldn't stand by and watch it die. "What can I do?" I asked. "You must spread the word," Unkhthi said. "Tell the people what you have seen, warn them of the danger. They must stop poisoning the river before it is too late." I nodded, my resolve hardening. I would do as the creature asked. I would tell the world about Unkhthi and the plight of the river. Unkhthi smiled, a chilling grin that sent shivers down my spine. "Thank you, Tommy Little Crow," it said. "You have done a great service to the water spirits." With that, it turned and disappeared into the night. I kept my promise to Unkhthi. I spoke to the tribal elders, the community, and anyone who would listen. I told them about the water spirit and the danger facing the river. At first they scoffed at my story, calling me crazy. But as the years passed and the river continued to deteriorate, people started to listen. The tribe launched a campaign to clean up the river, removing trash and debris and planting trees along its banks. They also began to educate the community about the importance of protecting the water. The river slowly began to heal, and the fish returned. The water became clearer, and the plants grew lush and green. I continued to fish the river, always keeping an eye out for Unkhthi. I never saw it again, but I knew it was out there, watching over the river, protecting it from harm. Years later, I learned that a group of scientists had discovered a new species of fish in the Missouri River. It was a large, predatory fish, with long, sharp teeth and a taste for human flesh. They named it the Anti-Hyla in honor of the Lakota water spirit. I smiled to myself knowing that the legend of Unkhthi lived on, a reminder of the power and mystery of the natural world. This happened to me on June 5, 1988. I was a rookie cop, still green behind the ears, working the night shift out in Ashton. It's one of those blink-and-you'll-miss-it towns tucked in the foothills of the Ozarks. More known for catfish noodling than crime scenes, name's Eli Turner. Wife Amy is a nurse, and we had our first baby girl on the way. Point is, I had a lot to live for and a whole lot to lose. That night began like any other. Betty Ann's diner for my usual coffee and gossip fix. Few traffic stops, nothing to raise an eyebrow. Then, around 2 a.m., it got weird. Dispatch crackled to life. A woman, hysterical, rambling about some kind of monster in the woods just off Route 9. At first I chalked it up to a wild animal, meth head antics, or both. Still, protocol is protocol. I headed out, there to investigate. The spot she mentioned was a stretch of unpaved road twisting through a dense stretch of forest, darkest pitch except for my cruiser headlights. I could feel the prickly unease on the back of my neck. I radioed for backup, but who knows how long it would take to get to my backwater patch. I got out, flashlight in one hand, gun in the other. The air was still and the woods eerily silent. And then I saw them. 2 glowing eyes reflecting the flashlight beam about 20 feet into the tree line. They were unlike any animal's eyes I'd ever encountered, huge in a strange acid yellow color. Heart pounding, I edged closer. The form the eyes belonged to started to come into focus, and my blood ran cold. It stood on 2 legs like a person, but the proportions were all wrong. It was immense, easily over 7 feet tall, covered in a coarse, dark gray hide. Its legs and arms were powerfully muscled, ending in vicious claws. The head, that's what really stuck with me, like a warped, monstrous wolf, with a huge, gaping jaw filled with razor-sharp teeth. It let out a low growl, the sound vibrating through me. Frozen by a mixture of fear and utter disbelief, I stood there like an idiot, the flashlight shaking in my hand. Then it lunged. I barely registered raising my gun before I was firing, the sound echoing through the woods. The bullets must have hit something because it roared in pain and lurched backwards. I took the opportunity and ran like hell back to the cruiser. Slamming the door, I threw it into reverse and spun the wheel. As I tore back down the dirt road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The creature was gaining fast, its yellow eyes blazing with fury. It was easily keeping pace, its form a blur in the darkness. Knowing I couldn't outrun that thing forever, I wrenched the steering wheel, swerving the car down a side track barely wider than the cruiser itself. I fishtailed through the trees, the branches scraping at the sides of the vehicle. Sweat dripped down my forehead as I prayed the narrow path wouldn't end in a dead end, leaving me trapped. Luckily, it spat me out onto a rarely used logging road. I pressed the accelerator hard, but I was running on fumes. Suddenly, the engine sputtered, coughed, and died. I slammed the heel of my hand against the dashboard in frustration. The damn thing chose now to run out of gas. A glance in the mirror and my stomach dropped. The creature was closing the gap rapidly. It was practically flying over the ground, its long strides devouring the distance and those horrible eyes locked on my taillights. Panic clawed at my sanity. I couldn't just sit here and wait for it to tear me to shreds. Grabbing my flashlight, I stumbled out of the car and into the woods. I knew it was a fool's errand, that the dense trees offered little protection, but blind instinct took over. As expected, the monster snarls echoed through the trees as it tracked me. I ran until my lungs burned, branches and thorns tearing at my skin. Just when I thought I couldn't go another step, I tripped, tumbling down a sharp embankment. I rolled until I smacked into a tree trunk, hard enough to knock the breath out of me. Dazed, I lay there waiting for the beast to descend and rip me apart. But silence greeted me instead. I cautiously lifted my head, heart pounding in my ears. Had it given up? Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of sirens in the distance. My backup was finally arriving, drawn by the gunshots. A wave of relief washed over me, then promptly receded as something else dawned on me. They were going to find my cruiser wrecked and abandoned. And in these woods, who knew what kind of wild story I'd have to spin to avoid them locking me up in the psych ward? With renewed resolve, I struggled to my feet. Every muscle in my body ached, but I had to put as much distance between me and that embankment as possible before the cavalry arrived. Stumbling along, guided more by blind luck than anything else, I somehow made my way back to the logging road. Dawn was breaking as I limped back to Ashton. I must have looked to sight, disheveled, clothes ripped, covered in dirt and blood, mine hopefully. My story to dispatch was a mumbled mess about chasing a meth head into the woods and losing him. They clearly thought I was either lying or delusional, but I was alive, and for that I was grateful. Aftermath. The incident changed me. The townsfolk of Ashton started calling me Monster Cop, a mix of ridicule and unease in their voices. After a while, the stares and whispers got too much. Amy and I packed up our things, our baby girl only a few months old then, and headed west. We put down roots in a dusty little town in Nevada. Life carried on, though I never spoke of that night to anyone, not even Amy. But it haunts me. Sometimes, lying awake in the dark, I see those eyes, the monstrous form. I wonder if it was a nightmare made reality. A creature of legend somehow stumbled into the backwaters of the Ozarks. Or worse, perhaps the stress cracked something in my mind and the monster I saw was me. Years passed. Our daughters grew up, and the Ashton nightmare started to fade into a bizarre memory. Then one night, I came home to find Amy sitting at the kitchen table, face pale. "Did you see this?" she asked, her voice shaking. She slid a local newspaper over to me. There, under a sensational headline, was a blurry photo of a massive wolf-like creature and a story about a series of mysterious livestock mutilations. The locations were all within a few hours' drive of our old home in Ashton. A chill ran down my spine. Could it be? Was the monster still out there? I'm a cop, damn it. I meant to protect people. Could I sit idly by if others were facing the same horror that almost tore my life apart? After so long, could I go back and face it down once more? I don't have any answers yet, but one thing is for sure. There's unfinished business waiting for me back in the Ozarks. My name is Emilio Guzman, and I am 27 years old. And this happened to me on July 20th, 2020. I remember that day clearly, because it was the day I thought a quiet camping trip could help me clear my head after my divorce. I packed up my old RV and headed to the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. It's a beautiful, dense forest, perfect for getting away from everything. I'd been there a few times before, but always with friends or family. This time I needed some solitude. I arrived mid-afternoon, parked the RV in a secluded spot, and set up a small campfire. I roasted a few hot dogs and sipped on a beer, letting the tranquility of the forest wash over me. The first night was uneventful, just the usual sounds of wildlife and the gentle rustling of leaves. I felt the kind of peace I hadn't experienced in months. The second day I decided to go for a hike. The weather was perfect, sunny but not too hot. I followed a trail that led deeper into the forest, enjoying the sound of birds and the sight of deer grazing in the distance. I had my backpack with some essentials: water, a snack, a map, and my pocket knife. I wasn't planning on being gone long. A couple of hours into my hike, I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. The roof was caved in on one side, and vines had started to reclaim it. Curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to take a closer look. Inside it was as you'd expect, dusty, with broken furniture and scattered debris. There was something strange about the place, though. On one of the walls there were markings that looked like they'd been scratched in with something sharp. They didn't make any sense to me, just random lines and symbols. I didn't stay long in the cabin. There was something unsettling about it, so I headed back to my RV. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows through the trees. I made it back just as darkness fell. That night, things started to feel different. The usual forest sounds were there, but they seemed distant, almost muted. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I chalked it up to my imagination and turned in early. The next morning I found something out near my campsite, large but not quite human. They were more like impressions in the dirt, spaced too far apart for a person, but not resembling any animal tracks I had ever seen. I took a few pictures with my phone, figuring I'd look them up later. I told myself it was probably a bear or something, though it didn't make much sense. Bears don't usually come that close to a campsite, and these prints were different. That evening I started hearing noises, not the usual animal sounds, but something else. A kind of shuffling, followed by what sounded like low whispers. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my campfire and my dinner. But as the night went on, the noises grew louder and more persistent. I grabbed my flashlight and decided to check it out, convinced it was just my nerves getting the best of me. I circled the campsite, shining the beam of light into the darkness. Nothing, just trees and shadows. I was about to head back to the fire when I saw something move. It was quick, darting between the trees. My heart started pounding as I swung the flashlight in the direction of the movement. For a split second I saw it, a figure tall and thin with pale, almost translucent skin. Then it was gone. I stumbled back to my RV, locking the door behind me. I sat there, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a trick of the light or my mind playing tricks on me. I didn't sleep much that night, every little sound setting me on edge. The following morning I found more footprints around my campsite. They were closer and more defined. I decided it was time to leave. Whatever was out there, I didn't want to stick around and find out. I packed up my things quickly, ready to get the hell out of there. As I was loading up the last of my gear, I heard it again, the shuffling and whispering. This time it was closer, almost right behind me. I turned, and there it was, standing at the edge of the trees. Its eyes, dark and hollow, seemed to bore into me. I froze, my mind racing. This wasn't my imagination. This was real. I fumbled for my pocket knife, the only thing I had for protection. The figure moved closer, its movements jerky and unnatural. I backed up slowly, trying to get to the RV without turning my back on it. It reached out, long fingers stretching toward me. In a panic, I threw the knife. It wasn't a well-aimed throw, more of a desperate attempt to buy myself a few seconds. The creature stopped, looking down at the knife lodged in its arm. It let out a sound, a mix between a hiss and a wheeze, before pulling the knife out and dropping it to the ground. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I jumped into the RV, slammed the door, and started the engine. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. It was standing there, watching me leave. That image is burned into my mind, its eyes dark and empty, following me as I sped down the dirt road. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town. I found a small diner and went inside, probably looking like a madman. I asked the waitress if there had been any strange sightings or stories about the forest. She gave me a puzzled look and shook her head. I showed her the pictures of the footprints. She frowned, saying she'd never seen anything like that before. I didn't press it any further. I just wanted to get back home, to put as much distance between me and whatever that thing was. It's been almost a year now, and I haven't been back to the forest. I've tried to look up information about what I saw, but there's nothing that quite matches it. Sometimes I wonder if it was all in my head, but then I remember those footprints, the knife, and those eyes. I've talked to a few people about it, but most just think I was overtired or stressed from the divorce. Maybe they're right, but deep down I know what I saw. I don't think I'll ever go camping alone again, and if you ever find yourself in the Allegheny National Forest, keep an eye out. You never know what might be watching you. I've thought a lot about what to call it, this thing that I encountered. The only word that comes to mind is Nyx. It sounds like something from folklore, fitting for a creature that seemed to come out of the night itself. So, if you're ever in that part of Pennsylvania and hear something moving in the trees, remember Nyx, and maybe, just maybe, stay a little closer to civilization. The summer sun beat down mercilessly as we packed the last of our camping gear into our old rust-spotted pickup truck. I was 12 years old, gangly and awkward, with a mop of unruly brown hair that refused to stay put no matter how much my mother fussed over it. My name is Alex, and this was supposed to be the camping trip that would change everything, though not in the way any of us expected. My older brother Jake was 16 and thought he was invincible. He lounged against the side of the truck, his favorite baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, feigning disinterest in the whole affair. But I could see the excitement simmering just beneath the surface. Jake had been talking about this trip for weeks, regaling me with tales of his plans to catch the biggest fish in the lake and maybe even spot a bear or two. Our parents, Tom and Sarah, were the driving force behind this excursion. Dad was a high school history teacher, and Mom ran a small bookstore in town. They had been saving up for this trip all year, determined to give us one last great family adventure before Jake went off to college in the fall. As we pulled out of our driveway, waving goodbye to our cozy suburban home, I felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. I had always been the anxious one in the family, prone to worrying about things that no one else seemed to notice. But today, as we set off on our grand adventure, I was determined to push those fears aside and embrace the spirit of exploration. The first few hours of the drive were uneventful. We sang along to Dad's old rock tunes, played countless rounds of I Spy, and munched on the snacks Mom had packed. The familiar landscape of our town gave way to rolling hills and dense forests as we ventured further into the wilderness. It was late afternoon when we approached the entrance to the state park where we'd be camping. The road narrowed, winding through thick stands of pine trees that seemed to close in around us. As we rounded a bend, I spotted a cattle guard stretched across the road, a metal grate designed to keep livestock from wandering too far. As our truck rumbled over the cattle guard, a flash of movement caught my eye. There, just beyond the tree line, stood a figure. It was hard to make out details in the dappled shadows, but I could clearly see a man staring intently at our passing vehicle. His gaze seemed to lock onto mine for a brief, heart-stopping moment before we drove past. "Did you see that?" I blurted out, twisting in my seat to look back. See what, honey? Mom asked, turning to face me. There was a man back there watching us, I explained, my voice tight with sudden anxiety. Jake rolled his eyes. Come on, Squirt. It was probably just a park ranger or something. But he looked strange, I insisted, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why the figure had unnerved me so much. Dad glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his expression a mix of concern and amusement. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about, Alex. Remember, we're in a popular camping area. Lots of people around. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As we continued deeper into the park, the memory of that watching figure lingered in the back of my mind, a shadow that refused to dissipate in the warm afternoon sun. We arrived at our designated campsite just as the sun was beginning to dip below the tree line. It was a small clearing nestled between towering pines, with a fire pit at its center and a rickety picnic table off to one side. A well-worn trail led down to the shores of a placid lake that glimmered invitingly in the fading light. As soon as the truck came to a stop, Jake leaped out, already talking a mile a minute about exploring the area. Mom and Dad shared an amused glance before starting to unload our gear. I hung back for a moment, my eyes scanning the dense forest that surrounded us. Everything looked peaceful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Alex, come help with the tents, Dad called, snapping me out of my reverie. I hurried over to lend a hand, trying to focus on the task at hand rather than my nagging fears. We had 3 small tents, one for Mom and Dad, one for Jake, and one for me. As we worked to set them up, I found myself constantly glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that mysterious figure from earlier lurking among the trees. But there was nothing there, just the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze and the occasional chirp of a bird. Once the tents were up, Mom started organizing our supplies while Dad got to work building a fire. Jake, impatient as always, was already pestering our parents about going for a quick hike before dinner. Come on, can't Alex and I just check out the trail real quick, he pleaded. We'll be back before it gets dark, I promise. Mom and Dad exchanged a look, having one of those silent conversations that parents seem to excel at. Finally, Dad nodded. All right, but stay on the marked trail and don't go too far. Be back in an hour, understood? Jake whooped with excitement and grabbed my arm, practically dragging me towards the trailhead. Come on, Squirt, adventure awaits. I hesitated for a moment, looking back at our cozy campsite. Part of me wanted to stay behind, to help Mom and Dad and bask in the safety of their presence. But I knew Jake would tease me mercilessly if I chickened out, so I squared my shoulders and followed him into the woods. The forest seemed to close in around us as we ventured deeper along the narrow trail. Shafts of golden sunlight filtered through the canopy above, creating a dappled pattern on the forest floor. Under different circumstances, I might have found it beautiful. But with each step we took away from the campsite, my unease grew. Jake, oblivious to my discomfort, chattered away excitedly about all the things he wanted to do during our trip. We've got to try fishing in that lake, he was saying, and maybe we can convince Dad to let us stay up late and tell ghost stories around the campfire. You know, really get into the whole camping experience. I managed a weak smile, not wanting to dampen his enthusiasm. We had been walking for about 20 minutes when a sound caught my attention, a rhythmic thudding noise coming from somewhere off to our right. Jake, I said, grabbing his arm, do you hear that? He paused, cocking his head to listen. Yeah, sounds like someone chopping wood or something. The sound grew louder, more insistent. Thud, thud, thud. It seemed to reverberate through the trees, setting my nerves on edge. Maybe we should head back, I suggested, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Jake laughed, giving me a playful shove. Don't be such a scaredy cat, Alex. It's probably just another camper getting firewood ready for the night. But as we stood there listening, the sound abruptly stopped. The sudden silence was almost more unnerving than the noise had been. I tugged on Jake's sleeve, no longer caring if he thought I was being a baby. Please, can we go back now? Something in my voice must have gotten through to him because Jake's teasing smile faded. He glanced around, suddenly seeming to realize how far we had wandered from the safety of our campsite. Yeah, okay, he said quietly. Let's head back. We turned and started retracing our steps, moving at a quicker pace than before. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed, that unseen eyes were watching our every move from the shadows between the trees. Jake must have sensed my unease because he reached out and gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "It's okay, Squirt," he said softly. "We're almost back." As we neared the campsite, I began to relax a little. The comforting glow of our campfire came into view, along with the welcome sound of our parents' voices. But just as we were about to step out of the tree line, a twig snapped loudly behind us. We both whirled around, hearts pounding. For a split second, I thought I saw a dark figure duck behind a tree. But when I blinked and looked again, there was nothing there. "Did you see that?" I whispered to Jake. He hesitated, then shook his head. "It was probably just a deer or something. Come on, I can smell dinner cooking." As we hurried back to the campsite, I couldn't help but feel that our little expedition had stirred something in the forest, something that was now awake and watching us with keen interest. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of activity. Mom and Dad had prepared a hearty campfire meal of hot dogs and baked beans, which we devoured with the ravenous appetite that only comes from a day spent in the great outdoors. As we ate, Jake regaled our parents with an exaggerated account of our hike, conveniently leaving out the part about the strange chopping sound and our hasty retreat. I stayed quiet, picking at my food and casting furtive glances at the darkening forest around us. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig made me jump. Mom noticed my unease and tried to draw me into the conversation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, waiting and watching. As night fell in earnest, Dad suggested we roast marshmallows for dessert. Under normal circumstances, this would have been the highlight of the evening for me. I loved the ritual of carefully turning the marshmallow over the flames, trying to achieve that perfect golden brown exterior. But tonight, even the prospect of gooey, sugary treats couldn't fully distract me from my growing sense of dread. We gathered around the campfire, its warm glow creating a small circle of light in the vast darkness of the forest. Dad passed out long roasting forks and a bag of marshmallows, and soon the air was filled with the sweet smell of caramelizing sugar. As I held my marshmallow over the flames, I heard it again, the soft crunch of twigs snapping somewhere in the darkness behind me. I whirled around, nearly dropping my marshmallow into the fire. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom looked up from her own perfectly roasted marshmallow, concern etching lines across her forehead. "Hear what, sweetie?" "That noise, like something's moving around out there." Dad leaned forward, peering into the darkness. "It's probably just a raccoon or maybe a deer. Lots of animals get curious about campsites, especially when there's food around." I wanted to believe him, but the sounds seemed too deliberate, too purposeful to be a simple animal. As if to confirm my fears, another twig snapped, closer this time. "There it is again," I insisted, my voice rising with panic. Jake rolled his eyes. "Chill out, Alex, you're letting your imagination run wild." But even as he spoke, I saw a flicker of doubt cross his face. He glanced towards the tree line, his cocky demeanor faltering for just a moment. The sounds continued, growing louder and more frequent. It was as if whatever was out there was circling our campsite, drawing ever closer. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Mom reached out and pulled me close, her arm warm and comforting around my shoulders. "It's okay, Alex. We're all here together. Nothing's going to hurt you." But her words of reassurance were cut short by a loud crash from just beyond the edge of our campsite. It sounded like a branch breaking under a heavy weight. Dad was on his feet in an instant, his face tight with concern. "Everyone stay close," he said, his voice low and urgent. He reached into the truck and pulled out something I hadn't even known he'd brought along, a revolver. The sight of the weapon in my father's hands made everything suddenly terrifyingly real. "Get in the truck," Dad ordered, his eyes never leaving the tree line. "Now!" We scrambled to obey, abandoning our half-eaten marshmallows and camping gear. Mom practically shoved Jake and me into the back seat before climbing in herself. Dad backed up slowly towards the driver's side door, the gun held steady in his hands. Just as he was about to get in, a figure burst from the underbrush at the edge of our campsite. In the flickering firelight, I caught a glimpse of wild eyes and something glinting in the man's hand, an axe, its blade dark with what looked horribly like blood. Dad didn't hesitate. He leaped into the driver's seat and gunned the engine, sending gravel flying as we peeled out of the campsite. I twisted in my seat to look out the back window, my heart in my throat. There, illuminated by our taillights, stood the man from the woods. He made no move to pursue us, just stood there watching as we sped away, the bloody axe hanging loosely at his side. His face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel the weight of his gaze boring into me. As we raced down the dark winding road, leaving our campsite and all our gear behind, a heavy silence fell over the truck. The only sounds were the roar of the engine and our ragged breathing. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice shaky and small in a way I'd never heard before. "Dad, what just happened?" Dad's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched tight. "I don't know, son, but we're safe now. That's all that matters." I huddled closer to Mom, unable to stop shaking. The image of that man with the axe was burned into my mind, a nightmare made flesh. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I would never set foot in a forest again. The drive home was a blur of conflicting emotions and tense silence. Dad kept the truck at a steady clip well above the speed limit, his eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror as if expecting to see headlights gaining on us at any moment. Mom sat rigid in the passenger seat, one hand gripping the door handle, the other reaching back to rest reassuringly on Jake's knee. Jake and I huddled together in the back seat, neither of us speaking. The initial shock and fear had given way to a sort of numb disbelief. Had that really happened? Had we really just fled from a madman with an axe? As the miles stretched on and the dense forest gave way to more open countryside, Dad finally eased off the gas a little. He cleared his throat, his voice rough when he spoke. "Is everyone okay?" We all murmured affirmatives, though okay felt like a stretch. Physically we were unharmed, but I knew that the events of this night would leave scars that couldn't be seen. What do you think that was all about?" Jake asked hesitantly, breaking the silence that had fallen over us once more. Dad sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, son. Could have been a drifter, maybe someone not right in the head. The important thing is that we're all safe now." "Should we call the police?" Mom suggested, her voice tight with worry. Dad nodded slowly. "We will once we get home. We'll report what happened, let them know there might be a dangerous individual in the area." As our truck ate up the miles, putting more and more distance between us and that terrifying encounter, I found my mind wandering, trying to make sense of what had happened. Who was that man? Why had he been lurking around our campsite? The image of his wild eyes and blood-stained axe kept flashing through my mind, making me shudder. "I saw him earlier," I said suddenly, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "When we first entered the park, by the cattle guard, he was watching us even then." Mom turned in her seat to look at me, her face pale in the dim light of the dashboard. "Are you sure, Alex?" I nodded, the memory crystallizing in my mind. "He was just standing there, staring at our truck as we passed. I tried to tell you guys, but we didn't listen," Dad finished, his voice heavy with regret. "I'm so sorry, Alex. We should have paid more attention." The rest of the drive passed in contemplative silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. By the time we pulled into our driveway, the first light of dawn was just beginning to streak the eastern sky. As we stumbled out of the truck, exhausted and still shaken, the familiar sight of our home felt like a balm to my frayed nerves. We had made it. We were safe. Dad immediately went to call the police, while Mom ushered Jake and me into the house. As I sank onto our living room couch, the events of the night finally caught up with me. I burst into tears. The summer of 2023 started like any other for Jake Thompson. As a 22-year-old recent college graduate, he was looking forward to one last adventure with his friends before diving into the real world of full-time employment. When his best friend Mike suggested a camping trip in the dense forests of Nebraska, Jake jumped at the opportunity. "Nebraska?" Sarah, Jake's girlfriend, had asked skeptically when he told her about the plan. "I didn't even know they had forests there." Jake had laughed it off. "Apparently they do. Mike says it's beautiful and his uncle owns some land out there. It'll be perfect, just us, nature, and no cell phone reception for miles. Little did Jake know that this trip would change his life forever. The group, Jake, Mike, Sarah, and their friends Emily and Chris, set off on a warm June morning. The drive from their hometown in Illinois took most of the day, with the landscape gradually shifting from flat farmlands to rolling hills, and eventually to the surprisingly lush forests of eastern Nebraska. As they drove deeper into the woods, following Mike's handwritten directions, an uneasy feeling began to settle in Jake's stomach. He couldn't shake the sensation that they were being watched, even though all he could see were endless trees on either side of the narrow dirt road. "Are you sure we're going the right way?" Sarah asked from the back seat, her voice tinged with concern. Mike nodded confidently. "Yeah, my uncle said it's pretty remote. That's what makes it so special. We'll have the whole place to ourselves." Just as the sun was beginning to set, they finally arrived at the clearing Mike's uncle had described. It was a beautiful spot, with a small, crystal-clear stream running along one edge, and tall pines surrounding them on all sides. As they began to set up camp, Jake couldn't help but notice how quiet it was. There were no bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just an eerie silence that seemed to press in on them from all sides. "Hey guys," he said, trying to keep his voice casual, "is it just me, or is it really quiet out here?" Emily looked up from where she was hammering a tent stake into the ground. "Now that you mention it, yeah, it's kind of creepy, isn't it?" Chris laughed, slapping Jake on the back. "Don't tell me you're scared already, man. We haven't even told any ghost stories yet." Jake forced a smile, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As darkness fell, the group gathered around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. The warmth and light of the fire seemed to push back the oppressive silence of the forest, and Jake began to relax. "So," Mike said, his face eerily illuminated by the flickering flames, "who wants to hear about the legend of these woods?" Sarah groaned. "Do we have to do the scary story thing?" "Come on, it's tradition," Chris insisted. "Let's hear it, Mike." Mike leaned forward, lowering his voice dramatically. "Well, my uncle told me that these woods have a dark history. The Native American tribes that used to live here called this place the Hungry Forest, and they avoided it at all costs." Jake felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. "According to the legend," Mike continued, "there's an ancient evil that lives in these woods. The natives called it the Wendigo, a creature that was once human but became twisted by greed and hunger. They say it stalks these forests, always searching for its next meal." Emily rolled her eyes. "That's just a story to scare kids, right?" Mike shrugged. "Maybe, but my uncle swears he's seen things out here that he can't explain. Strange tracks, animals mutilated in ways that don't make sense, and sometimes screams in the night that sound almost human but not quite." A twig snapped in the darkness beyond the campfire's light, causing everyone to jump. They all laughed nervously, but Jake noticed that Sarah had moved closer to him, her hand seeking his. "All right, that's enough scary stories for one night," Jake said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We should probably get some sleep if we want to explore tomorrow." As they retired to their tents, Jake couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over him. He lay awake for hours, listening to the unnatural silence of the forest, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Just as he was finally drifting off to sleep, he heard it, a faint distant sound that made his blood run cold. It was a scream, but not like any he had ever heard before. It was high-pitched and inhuman, filled with a hunger that seemed to echo through the trees. Jake sat bolt upright, his heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" he whispered to Sarah, who was sleeping soundly next to him. She stirred slightly but didn't wake. Jake listened intently, but the sound didn't come again. Eventually exhaustion overtook him, and he fell into a fitful sleep filled with dark dreams of things that lurked in the shadows. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the horrors of the night seeming far away in the cheerful light of day. As the group ate breakfast around the smoldering remains of last night's fire, Jake debated whether to mention the scream he had heard. "Did anyone else hear anything strange last night?" he finally asked, trying to keep his tone casual. The others looked at him blankly. "Like what?" Chris asked around a mouthful of granola. Jake hesitated. "I don't know, Just weird noises, I guess." Mike grinned. "Sounds like someone got a little spooked by my story last night." Jake forced a laugh, but he couldn't shake the memory of that inhuman cry. "Yeah, I guess so," he said, deciding to let it go. The day passed pleasantly enough as they explored the surrounding woods, hiked along the stream, and enjoyed the unspoiled beauty of nature. But as the sun began to set, Jake felt the same sense of unease creeping over him. That night, as they sat around the campfire, Jake noticed something odd. "Hey, where are all the insects?" he asked suddenly. The others looked at him quizzically. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "Listen," Jake said. "There's no buzzing, no crickets chirping, nothing. Isn't that weird?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the group as they all strained their ears, realizing Jake was right. The forest was unnaturally quiet, devoid of the usual nighttime sounds they would expect. "Maybe it's just not a good area for bugs," Emily suggested weakly, but no one looked convinced. As they headed to bed that night, Jake could feel the tension in the air. Something was wrong in these woods, and he was beginning to think it wasn't just his imagination. For the next few days, strange occurrences continued to plague the group. Food would go missing from their cooler overnight, with no signs of animal intrusion. They would find odd tracks around the campsite, too large to be a deer, but unlike anything they had seen before. Jake began to notice a pattern. Each night, just before dawn, he would wake to the sound of that terrible, inhuman scream echoing through the trees. But whenever he mentioned it to the others, they claimed not to have heard anything. On the fourth night, Jake was determined to stay awake and catch whatever was stalking their camp. He lay still in his tent, eyes wide open, listening intently to every sound of the forest. Around 4 a.m. he heard it, a faint scratching sound just outside the tent. His heart racing, Jake reached for the flashlight he had placed next to his sleeping bag. With trembling hands, he switched on the light and directed it towards the sound. What he saw through the fabric of the tent made his blood run cold. Illuminated by the beam of his flashlight was a face, but not any face Jake had ever seen before. It was vaguely deer-like in shape, but horribly distorted. The skin was stretched tight over an elongated skull, the eyes sunken and glowing with an otherworldly light. Massive antlers sprouted from its head, twisted and gnarled like the branches of a dead tree. For a moment, Jake and the creature stared at each other, frozen in mutual shock. Then, as if triggered by the light, the thing let out a piercing shriek that sounded like a woman's scream, amplified to impossible levels. Jake dropped the flashlight, his hands flying to his ears to block out the terrible sound. He could hear the creature crashing away through the underbrush, moving far faster than any normal animal should be able to. "Jake? Jake?" Sarah was shaking him, her face pale with fear. "What's happening? What was that noise?" But Jake couldn't answer. He sat there shaking, the image of that monstrous face burned into his mind. The next morning, Jake finally told the others what he had seen. To his surprise, instead of disbelief, he was met with grim acceptance. "I've been hearing things too," Chris admitted. "I thought I was going crazy." Emily nodded. "I keep feeling like we're being watched, and those tracks we've been seeing, they're not normal." Mike looked troubled. "I thought my uncle was just trying to scare me with those old stories, but now, I'm not so sure." They spent the day researching on Mike's satellite phone, looking up local legends and the lore surrounding the Wendigo. What they found chilled them to the bone. The Wendigo, they learned, was a creature from Algonquian folklore, a malevolent spirit that possessed humans and drove them to acts of cannibalism. It was said to stalk the forests, always hungry, always hunting. "But Wendigos are supposed to be found in the northern forests," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "In Canada and the northern states. What's one doing in Nebraska?" No one had an answer, but they all knew one thing: they needed to leave, and fast. As they hurriedly packed up their camp, the feeling of being watched intensified. Strange noises echoed through the trees, and more than once, Jake caught glimpses of movement just at the edge of his vision. Finally, as the sun was beginning to set, they piled into Mike's SUV. But as Mike turned the key, the engine sputtered and died. "No, no, no," Mike muttered, trying again and again to start the car. "This can't be happening." A bone-chilling shriek split the air, closer than ever before. Through the windshield, Jake saw a tall, emaciated figure step out of the trees. It was the creature he had seen, but now in full view, a nightmare made flesh. "Run!" Jake yelled, throwing open his door. They abandoned the car, fleeing into the darkening forest with only the clothes on their backs and whatever they could grab in their haste. What followed was a night of terror unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. They ran through the pitch-black woods, the creature always just behind them, its inhuman screams driving them on even when their bodies begged for rest. Several times they thought they had lost it, only for that terrible cry to echo through the trees, spurring them on once more. As dawn began to break, they stumbled onto a highway. A passing trucker, startled by their wild appearance and frantic waves, stopped to pick them up. In the months that followed, Jake and his friends tried to make sense of what had happened to them in those Nebraska woods. They reported their experience to the authorities, but their story was met with skepticism and disbelief. Jake found himself unable to shake the memory of what he had seen. He became obsessed with researching similar encounters, reaching out to others who claimed to have seen the Wendigo. Though he never returned to those specific woods, Jake continued to explore the forests of Nebraska, driven by a mix of fear and fascination. He never encountered the creature again, but on quiet nights he sometimes thought he could hear a distant, inhuman scream echoing on the wind. The experience had changed him forever, opening his eyes to a world beyond what he had previously believed possible. And always in the back of his mind was the knowledge that somewhere out there in the dark and silent woods, the Wendigo was still hunting, still hungry, waiting for its next unsuspecting victim. As Jake finished writing down his account of that fateful camping trip, he glanced at the clock. 2 hours had passed since he began, but the memories were as fresh as if it had happened yesterday. He saved the document, knowing that even if no one ever believed his story, he would never forget the terror of those nights in the Nebraska woods. My name is Fernando Ramirez, and I am 35 years old, and this happened to me in August 2020. I had just wrapped up a long stretch of working overtime at the garage. I'm a mechanic, you see, and the summer rush was brutal this year. So I decided to take my RV and get out of town for a bit. I headed up to this spot I know in the middle of nowhere in Montana, a place called Flat Rock Ridge, not on any map you'll find, but it's got this serene river and no cell service, just what I needed. I arrived on a Friday evening. The drive up there was uneventful, just miles of empty road and the occasional deer darting across. I parked the RV near the river, set up my campfire, and cracked open a beer. It felt good to be away from the noise and the grime. The first night was peaceful. I slept like a log. The next day I decided to hike up the ridge. It's a tough climb, but the view from the top is worth it. I packed some sandwiches, water, and my old reliable Swiss Army knife, just in case. The trail was overgrown, but I didn't mind. It added to the feeling of being cut off from everything. Halfway up, I noticed something odd. The birds, which were usually noisy, had gone silent. It was just the sound of my boots crunching on the gravel and the occasional rustle of leaves. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe there was a predator nearby. As I reached the top, I spotted an old cabin, one I hadn't seen before on my previous trips. The cabin was in disrepair, with its door hanging off one hinge and windows boarded up. Inside it was dark and smelled of damp wood and decay. I found an old newspaper on the table, dated from 1984. Weird, I thought. Who would leave this here? That night, back at the RV, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I chalked it up to the creepy cabin and tried to sleep. Around midnight, I heard a noise outside, not the usual rustling of animals or the wind. It was a soft thud, like someone walking. I got up and peered out the window, but saw nothing. I decided to step outside and have a look around. There was no one, but the feeling of being watched was intense. I went back inside and locked the door, gripping my knife tightly under the blanket. The next morning, I found footprints around my RV. They were large, too big to be human. My heart raced as I traced them to the river where they disappeared. I debated whether to stay or leave, but I didn't want to let some animal ruin my getaway. So I stayed. By the third night, I was on edge. I kept hearing noises, whispers almost, coming from the woods. I couldn't sleep, so I sat by the fire, staring into the dark. Suddenly I saw something move. A figure, just out of the firelight, watching me. I stood up, knife in hand, and called out, "Who's there?" No response. The figure just stood there, not moving. Then it came closer. I could make out its shape now. It was tall, too tall to be a person, and its eyes glowed faintly in the firelight. I felt a chill run down my spine. I backed away, trying to keep the fire between us. The thing moved slowly, deliberately. It wasn't afraid of me. I did what any sane person would do. I ran, slammed the door shut, and locked it. I could hear it outside, circling. I grabbed my hunting rifle from under the bed, cursing myself for not using it sooner. But when I looked out the window, it was gone. Just the dark, silent woods. The next morning I decided enough was enough. I packed up and headed out. As I was driving down the dirt road, I saw something in the rearview mirror. The same figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching me leave. I got back to town and reported what happened to the sheriff. He listened, nodding along, but I could tell he didn't believe me. "Probably a bear," he said. "You know how they are this time of year." I knew it wasn't a bear, but I didn't argue. I just wanted to forget the whole thing. A week later, I read in the local paper that a hiker had gone missing near Flat Rock Ridge. His name was Samuel Green, a young guy who worked at the local hardware store. The search parties found no trace of him, just his tent and a campfire. I couldn't help but wonder if he had seen the same thing I did. I decided to dig a bit. I went back to that cabin, this time with more gear and a friend. Mike Thompson, who didn't believe in any of this nonsense but agreed to come along for the adventure. When we got there, the cabin was just as I left it, but inside, we found something new. Fresh scratches on the walls and the same large footprints I saw near my RV. Mike finally believed me when he saw those prints. We decided to stay the night and keep watch. Around midnight, we heard it again, the soft thud of footsteps. Mike and I stood back to back, rifles ready. The figure appeared, just like before, but this time it came closer, stepping into the moonlight. It was like nothing I had ever seen. Tall, gaunt, with limbs too long for its body and eyes that glowed faintly. It moved with an eerie grace, almost floating. We fired at it, but the bullets didn't seem to affect it. It let out a sound, a low, rumbling noise that made my skin crawl. We ran. We didn't stop until we reached the RV. We could hear it following us, but it never attacked, just kept its distance, watching. We drove out of there as fast as we could. Back in town, we tried to tell the sheriff again, but this time he was more skeptical. No one had seen anything like it. They thought we were just trying to scare people, but we knew what we saw. Mike and I did some research. We found old stories, folklore about a creature called Silas, a name passed down through generations. It was said to be an ancient guardian of the forest, one that didn't take kindly to intruders. No one knew where it came from or what it wanted, but the stories all ended the same way: missing people, never found. I haven't been back to Flat Rock Ridge since. I sold the RV and bought a small cabin by a lake closer to town. Mike and I still talk about that night, but we tried to keep it to ourselves. No one would believe us anyway, sometimes late at night. I think I see those glowing eyes watching me from the trees. I try to tell myself it's just my imagination, but deep down I know Silas is still out there, guarding his woods, waiting. And that's the story. Believe it or not, that's what happened. If you ever find yourself near Flat Rock Ridge, stay away from the old cabin. Some things are better left alone. This happened to me on June 15, 2015. I was working as a deputy with the Sheriff's Department in Payson, Arizona, just a small town nestled up in the pines. Been a cop for about 5 years then. You get used to the quiet life, handle the occasional domestic dispute, maybe a drunk driver once in a while. Payson's the kind of place where everybody knows each other. I'm Mark Bennett. First call of the day seems simple enough. Mrs. Elwood runs the little general goods store down on Main Street, reports a petty theft. A teenage kid nabbed a bag of chips in a candy bar. I drive out, talk to Mrs. Elwood, a sweet elderly lady with a heart of gold and a tongue that could flay a man alive if he crossed her. Kid's name is Danny Owens, troublemaker from way back. His ma's a mess, always in and out of rehab. I know the Owens place, a rundown trailer out by the creek. Seems like the ideal place to catch young Danny red-handed. I head out, the cruiser bumping down the dirt road that winds along the creek. Trailers here aren't fancy, but the Owens place has seen better days. Windows patched up with duct tape, yard a mess of rusted car parts and old tires. The air hangs heavy with the smell of stale beer and something else I can't quite place. I knock on the warped screen door. No answer. Quiet is unnerving. Place feels empty. I walk around back, keeping an eye out. See an open window with the screen busted out. That's how Danny probably got in and out, but it sends a shiver down my spine. I call out his name again, then decide to head in. Mrs. Owens, if she's home, won't like me barging in. But there's something off that I can't shake. Inside is worse than I expected. Beer bottles all over the floor, stains on the threadbare carpet. Looks like blood. A sense of dread settles in my gut. I hear a noise upstairs, a faint whimper. Follow the sound, gun drawn. My footsteps echo on the warped wooden floorboards. Upstairs, the kid's room is empty, his things scattered everywhere. Then I find the source of the whimpers. Huddled in a closet under a pile of dirty clothes is a little girl, no older than 6 or 7, with tear tracks streaking her face. My heart sinks. It's Sarah Wilson, lives a few trailers down, went missing 2 days ago. Nobody had any leads. I gently lift her out of the closet. She clings to me like a lifeline, her small body trembling. "Where's Danny?" I ask, trying to keep my voice calm. Sarah shakes her head, sobs racking her body. The monster, it took him. A wave of nausea washes over me. Monster? What the hell does that mean? I get Sarah out of the trailer, into the cruiser, and call it in. Report Mrs. Owens missing, Sarah Wilson found, and a possible child abduction in progress. My voice trembles as I say the words Sarah told me. Backup arrives fast. Small-town cops stick together. We toss the Owens place, but find nothing except more signs of a struggle. Of something wrong. The sun's already starting to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows. We search the woods till nightfall, but Danny's nowhere to be seen. We put out an APB, but as the hours stretch into the night, the pit in my stomach tells me it's too late. Something monstrous is out there in the twilight, something I never imagined I might face. Next morning, they call in a K9 unit from the city. The dog picks up a scent trail, heading into the denser part of the pine forest towards the old Mogollon Rim. I'm part of the team that follows, a knot of tension in my chest. The pines grow thick, filtering out the sunlight. The air hangs humid and still. Every rustle of leaves sounds like a footfall. Every branch cracking sounds like a hungry growl. The dog leads us through the maze of trees for hours. Then up ahead it starts barking, straining at the leash. My heart pounds a heavy rhythm in my ears. I push through the undergrowth and into a clearing. There on the ground is something that makes my blood run cold. It's Danny Owens. What's left of him, anyway. His clothes are torn, his body twisted into an unnatural shape, like a broken doll tossed aside. The dog circles him, whining anxiously. The sight's enough to make a seasoned cop lose his lunch, but I force myself to focus, to examine the scene with all the training I can muster. Around his body are massive footprints, not animal, not human. Whatever did this was huge, powerful, and utterly vicious. One of the guys with me swears under his breath. Another makes the sign of the cross, his face pale. I search for something, anything that makes sense. But the truth is, there's no explanation for this, not one the textbooks prepared me for. I get on the radio, voice barely a whisper. I describe the wounds, the footprints, trying to keep my composure. On the other end of the line, there's silence for a long moment. Then the chief clears his throat. "Bennett," he says, his voice grim, "meet us back at the station. We need to talk." Back at the station, the atmosphere feels heavy with dread. The canine handler tells us what he knows, what the dog smelled: decay. And an underlying scent of rotting meat clinging to Danny's remains. That chilling detail settles in my bones. The chief calls in a specialist, a grizzled park ranger named Walker, who's worked the area for decades. He's the closest thing Payson has to an expert on the wilderness. Walker listens impassively, his sun-worn face creased in thought, then says what we're all too scared to admit out loud. "That ain't no animal I know of." His voice is low, rough. "Something's out there. Something that don't belong in these woods." A cold fear slithers down my spine. We spend the rest of the day planning search parties, roadblocks, warning folks in the more remote areas. Payson doesn't sleep well that night. The shadows grow long and twisted. Every creak and groan of a house takes on a sinister tone. Next morning I'm out at first light. We comb the forest in concentric circles, widening out from where Danny's body was found. The pines stretch on for miles, whispering with secrets the sunlight can't reach. Tension hangs thick, making me jumpy. I know I'm not the only one. Every rustle of underbrush seems pregnant with menace. Hours go by, fruitless, agonizing hours. Then, over the radio, I hear my name called in a panicked voice. It's Johnson, one of the deputies I grew up with. His location isn't far from mine. I start running, hard in my throat. When I reach the clearing, I understand the fear in Johnson's voice. The scene is even more horrific than Danny's. Two hikers, a young couple from Phoenix, ripped to shreds, barely recognizable as human, and those same inhuman footprints circled around their bodies like a vulture. I swallow back the bile rising in my throat. My hands tremble as I take photos for evidence. The forest feels suffocating, filled with unseen eyes. I radio in, tell them what I found. Chief's voice crackles back, grim as death. "Pull out, Bennett. All units pull out. We ain't dealing with nothing we can handle." We retreat, but the forest seems to cling to us like burrs. It's in the haunted look in my partner's eyes, in the way the trees seem to lean in. Every snap of a twig underfoot sends my pulse racing. Back in town, a quiet terror descends upon Payson. Kids aren't allowed outside. Doors are double-bolted at night. Local hunters, those usually brash and boisterous men, suddenly go silent. News crews descend like flies, hungry for the story and the rising body count. Walker calls in some favors, gets us reinforcements from the city, even a few federal agents. They come armed with heavy-duty rifles and night vision equipment, determined faces set beneath tactical helmets. For a brief moment we feel hopeful, like maybe, just maybe, these guys can handle whatever monstrosity hides in our woods. Those hopes are cruelly dashed. The attacks continue, growing bolder and more frequent. The monster, whatever it is, learns our patterns, strikes where we're weakest. It picks off a lone patrolman, ambushes an FBI team, shreds them apart with the same terrible strength. We find the bodies, but the feds leave. They cut their losses and return to the city lights, leave us the small-town cops to face the darkness alone. The monster becomes a part of life in Payson, an ugly, twisted part. We don't talk about it much, not aloud at least, but it colors everything we do. The general store closes early. Kids don't play in the street after dusk. Hunters don't venture into those cursed woods anymore. We patrol in pairs, always on edge, knowing every radio call might be our last. Some people leave Payson. Can't say I blame them. I think about it sometimes too. I've got a cousin in Phoenix, a sister in Flagstaff. Could start over, somewhere new, somewhere where the shadows don't whisper of hungry claws, but most of us stay. This is our home. We dig in, stubborn as ever. The months bleed into years, the attacks less frequent but no less brutal. We never get a good look at the beast, just fleeting glimpses in the night. Massive, lumbering on two legs, eyes glinting in the darkness like dying embers. Some believe it's a bear, driven mad with disease. Others whisper rumors of old Native American curses or skinwalkers or things even less savory. I try not to listen, try to stick to the facts, but the facts are that we're powerless, that the monster still rules the trees. And the aftermath, I guess it hasn't happened yet, at least not completely. Some wounds never heal, some scars never fade. Me? I got a few new gray hairs. Payson's got a lot less people and a lot more locked doors. Once in a while, something disappears off the edges of town. A dog, sometimes a drifter passing through. We don't talk about it. We bury the memory deep, along with all the ones we've lost. And we wait, we watch, we endure. The fire lookout tower perched on the edge of Shoshone National Forest in Wyoming had been my lone sanctuary for the better part of 3 months. My days were a pattern of surveillance and solitude, nights a communion with the whispers of the wild. As Eldon, I carried the weight of a past life, a corporate defector seeking redemption in nature's embrace. Then came the week wildfires left scars across the state, making my role as a vigilant guardian not just routine but essential. My isolation was seldom interrupted, save for supply drops by a park ranger named Litris, whose presence was as brief as it was welcome. One dusk as amber hues gave way to twilight grayness, an anomaly unsettled me. An inexplicable void in the forest canopy far below, not charred terrain but cleanly emptied of life. It drew my binoculars with magnetism, yet refused to unfold its mystery. Days conveyed news of missing hikers, campers last seen trekking towards that very void. This was brushed off as wilderness claiming its due, yet a pattern began to loom. Entranced by this quandary, I plotted their last known locations on maps spread across my cabin's floor. Every point was a breadcrumb leading back to that enigmatic clearing. The disquiet roosted within me when Litris relayed found belongings, an abandoned campsite bordering the clearing. 2 mildewed sleeping bags lay hollow in parted company with laughter and warmth forever. Expensive gear left discarded without a crisis to explain their hurried exit. A premonition seeped into my thoughts. Something unknown yet palpably menacing was at play, a creature governed by hunger or territoriality. I fashioned it within confines of nature's law. Claws for hunting, camouflage granting it leverage over prey. An apex predator hidden in plain sight amidst our protected expanse. The night air grew sharp as I shared fragmented jokes with Leotris over DeadStatic. Laughter was our bulwark against encroaching dread. My vigil's breath now carried an undertone of vigilance for more than fire. It sought to decry any footprint of humanity threatened by unseen monstrosity. On an evening when moonlight laid bare much of the landscape's secrets, movement flickered at the fringe of visibility. A form shrouded in mundane atrocity cascaded through timberland with devastating silence. My breath stills at each recollection. The scent of pine masked a metallic tang hanging dormant in air misplaced by death's ignore. Leotris's voice crackles through alarmingly late one evening. Her tone carries veiled panic. Eldon inbound, new development. The radio succumbs to silence before delivering relief or despair. I grab the radio, heart pounding. Leotris, come in, what's happening? Only static answers back. Wait, but the silence stretches long and thick. Fearing the worst, I consider calling for help, but hesitate. The creature lurking near could listen, could be provoked by human voices. Assistance is hours away. Time is a luxury those at the campsite may not have. Decision made, I leave the radio, grab my flashlight, and head toward their last known position. As I advance through trees, I spot broken branches, trampled undergrowth, signs of struggle or flight clear on the forest floor. I arrive at the camp only to freeze at the sight before me. In a carnage-smeared scene lay Leotris, lifeless amidst overturned soil. No wounds visible from a distance, destruction without a mark to name its author. My breath falters, but panic stays my response. Then it emerges, a mass of muscle and fur with eyes that gleam dull yellow in the flashlight's beam. No bear or wolf this size, no flesh-eater matches it. Nature does not list this beast. Standing tall on hind legs, it seems almost manlike until you see its snout, its claws, evolution crafted for a sole purpose, to kill. Without a word or sound, it lunges forth. I turn and run back toward my cabin with terror close behind. Sprinting without looking back, branches whip past as I dodge roots and rocks in my mad dash for safety. I reach my post and hide inside. Dawn breaks without further incident. I recount what unfolded over the radio to officials once they crackle through with morning's first light. They retrieve Leotris. No one speaks of what might roam these woods out of fear of ridicule, or worse, belief. Weeks pass before tranquility returns to our expanse. The memory of that night etches in my mind. Leotris's brave soul lost. A creature outside mankind's understanding prowls our earthly realm. We speak nothing of it thereafter. Yet sometimes around campfires, or during long shifts alone listening to that DeadStatic noise, my gaze wanders towards the tree line. The knowledge lives silently among us. Deep in these woods walks an unknown predator. I always loved the idea of a getaway in nature, away from the chaos of daily life. So when my buddy Alton Graves suggested we take his new RV out for a weekend trip, I jumped at the chance. Alton and I had known each other since college. We both worked stressful jobs. He was in finance, and I managed a chain of restaurants. We needed a break. We picked a spot in the Chugach National Forest in Alaska. It wasn't the most popular location, which meant it was perfect for a quiet trip. We arrived late in the afternoon, parked the RV near a serene lake, and set up a campfire. The sky was clear, the air was crisp, and it felt like the start of a perfect weekend. Alton was always the jokester. As we sat around the fire, he started telling some ridiculous story about a bear that could open beer cans with its teeth. I'm telling you, man, these bears are getting smarter. Next thing you know, they'll be hacking into our bank accounts. He laughed. I chuckled and took a sip of my beer. If a bear hacks into my account, it better pay my student loans. The night grew colder, and we decided to call it a night. We settled into the RV, with Alton taking the bed at the back and me on the pull-out couch in the main area. The sounds of the forest were oddly comforting, and I drifted off to sleep quickly. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a strange noise. It wasn't the usual rustling of leaves or the calls of nocturnal animals. This was something else, something closer. I listened intently, but it stopped. I figured it was just my imagination, and went back to sleep. The next morning, Alton and I went for a hike. The trail was beautiful, lined with towering trees and the occasional glimpse of the lake through the foliage. We talked about everything and nothing, enjoying the peace and quiet. "Ever think about quitting your job and just living out here?" Alton asked, looking around. I replied, "But then I remember I like hot showers and decent Wi-Fi." We laughed and continued on. The day passed uneventfully, with us exploring the area and taking in the scenery. By evening, we were back at the campsite, cooking dinner over the fire. As night fell, the noises of the forest returned. This time, though, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I didn't mention it to Alton, not wanting to ruin the trip with my paranoia. Around midnight, I heard the noise again. It was a low, guttural sound, like an animal, but more unsettling. I sat up and strained my ears, trying to locate the source. It seemed to be coming from the edge of the clearing, near the tree line. "Alton, you awake?" I whispered. He groaned. "Yeah, what's up? Do you hear that?" He listened for a moment, probably just a raccoon or something. "Go back to sleep." But I couldn't. I got up and grabbed the flashlight, deciding to check it out. "I'm going to take a look." "You're nuts, man," Alton mumbled, rolling over. I stepped outside, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The sound had stopped again, but I was determined to find out what it was. I walked slowly toward the tree line, my heart pounding. Suddenly I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I swung the flashlight around, but there was nothing there, just trees and shadows. I stood there for a moment, feeling like an idiot, and then I heard it again. This time it was closer, right behind me. I turned around, and there it was. I could barely make it out in the darkness, but it was large, hunched over, and had a strange, almost human-like silhouette. Before I could react, it lunged at me, knocking me to the ground. I scrambled to my feet and ran back to the RV, slamming the door shut behind me. "Alton, there's something out there." He sat up, rubbing his eyes. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Something attacked me. I don't know what it is, but it's not a raccoon." He grabbed a knife from the kitchenette and handed it to me. "Stay here, I'll check it out." "No way, man, we stick together." We both stepped outside, knives in hand, and scanned the area with the flashlight. The forest was silent again, as if whatever it was had disappeared. We didn't see anything, but I knew what I had felt. It wasn't my imagination. We went back inside and locked the door. Neither of us slept much that night, listening for any sign of the creature. Morning came, and we decided to cut the trip short. It wasn't worth the risk. As we packed up, we noticed something disturbing. The ground near the RV was disturbed, as if something had been digging or dragging something heavy. There were strange marks, almost like claw marks in the dirt. "What do you think it was?" I asked, looking at Alton. "I don't know, but I'm not sticking around to find out." We got in the RV and started the drive back to civilization. As we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every now and then, I would glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the creature following us. We didn't talk much on the way back. When we finally reached the nearest town, we stopped at a diner to grab some food and collect our thoughts. The place was quiet, with only a few locals sitting at the counter. Alton and I took a booth in the corner. He ordered a coffee and I got a burger. As we waited for our food, we tried to make sense of what had happened. "Do you think we should tell someone?" I asked. "Tell them what? That we saw some kind of monster in the woods? They'll think we're nuts." He had a point. Who would believe us? We barely believed it ourselves. Our food arrived and we ate in silence, both of us lost in our thoughts. After we finished eating, we decided to go our separate ways. Alton had a long drive back to Anchorage, and I needed to get home and try to process everything. We agreed to keep in touch and let each other know if anything else strange happened. A few weeks passed and life started to return to normal. The trip felt like a bad dream, something that happened in another lifetime. I was back at work, dealing with the usual stresses and trying to forget about that night in the forest. Then I got a call from Alton's sister. She was frantic, saying that Alton had gone missing. He hadn't shown up for work, and no one had heard from him in days. My heart sank. I knew it had something to do with whatever we encountered in the woods. I drove up to Anchorage to help with the search. The police were involved, and they were treating it as a missing persons case. They asked me a lot of questions about our trip, but I didn't tell them everything. I knew it sounded crazy, and I didn't want them to dismiss Alton's disappearance as a result of our overactive imaginations. We searched for weeks, but there was no sign of him. It was like he had vanished into thin air. The police eventually gave up, but I couldn't. I knew I had to find out what happened to him. One night I returned to the campsite. I parked the RV in the same spot and waited. The forest was just as I remembered, quiet and eerie. I didn't sleep, just sat there, listening for any sound, any sign of the creature. Around midnight I heard it again, the same low, unsettling noise. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside, my heart pounding in my chest. The noise grew louder, and I saw the same movement near the tree line. This time I didn't run. I stood my ground, determined to find out what this thing was. The creature emerged from the shadows, and I finally got a good look at it. It was tall, with long, gangly limbs, and a face that was almost human, but twisted and grotesque. I raised the flashlight, and the beam caught its eyes. They glowed with an unnatural light, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The creature took a step toward me, and I braced myself for the worst. Suddenly it stopped. It tilted its head as if studying me, and then it turned and disappeared back into the forest. I stood there, trembling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I never saw the creature again, but I knew it was still out there. I named it Harbinger, because it felt like a warning, a sign that something terrible was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Alton was never found, and I never went camping again. The forest held too many dark memories, too many unanswered questions. I moved on with my life, but I could never shake the feeling that the Harbinger was still out there, watching, waiting. Years later, I still think about that night. I wonder what would have happened if we had left earlier, if we had never gone on that trip. But most of all, I wonder if the Harbinger will ever come back, and if it does, what it will take from me next. I had taken the job as a fire lookout in the sprawling forests of the Chippewa National Forest, a remote ribbon of wilderness in Minnesota. The isolation suited me. I was looking to escape the cling of past mistakes and a failed marriage. My name is Ryan Wildspirit, 35 years old, and solitude was my chosen sanctuary. From my tower, perched high above the tree line, I watched for plumes of smoke that might signal a blaze. My only company was a radio crackling with the occasional check-ins from my distant supervisor, Remy. It started subtly, overlooked oddities in an otherwise regimented routine, missing supplies from the cabin, strange marks on the trees around the base of my tower. Not quite animal, not quite human. Then came the discovery that severed any semblance of normalcy. 2 hikers, one early morning, appeared beneath my tower in a panic. Their friend had gone missing during the night. They described sounds in the darkness, unsettling screeches that made their hair stand on ends. Their worry infected me, and with palpable reluctance, I descended to assist in what I presumed was an ill-prepared hiker's more than likely unfortunate encounter with local wildlife. We combed the forest with methodical precision learned from mandatory search and rescue training. That's when we found what no training could prepare me for. Not their friend, but rather what remained. Tucked against a fallen log was an unnaturally twisted silhouette, marked more by absence than presence. Flesh flayed in patterns that suggested neither hunger nor defense, but something akin to grotesque artistry. The hiker's reaction was raw and unfiltered dread. Names like Vega and Darnell weren't meant to be attached to faces twisted by such terror. I urged them back to safety with assurances laced heavily with doubts I felt bitterly sawing through my gut. The nights became harrowing ordeals. Every shadow at my window seemed to move with deliberate intent. The silhouette I'd seen by day haunted me, painting every innocent rustle with malevolent purpose. As rumors spread through radio check-ins about other disappearances, details scarce but outcomes shared a chilling sameness, mutilation disguised as some deranged interpretation of craft. Conversations with Remy grew strained as my tension bled through each static-ridden exchange. Jokes about needing thicker socks to ward off the cold did little to thaw the chill that had finally, it seemed, the forest itself began closing in, a conspiracy of flora and fauna against human intrusion. Alone became not just situation, but also sensation, a word that scratched at the inside of my skull. One crisp dawn, I stepped out upon a discovery that shredded any hope remaining. My ladder removed and repurposed into a gnarled construction. It looked almost ritualistic, the same precision marring its arrangement as those unspeakable acts upon human forms. The following morning brought quiet. I expected screams, maybe another mangled body, but there was nothing. The silence drove me to action. I needed to leave, find people, or at least a place where a signal could break through the dense canopy. I left a note for Remy. It was brief, outlined my plan to hike out and get help. And returning to base without knowing what waited felt like signing my own death warrant. The day passed in a blur of movement. Hours turned into miles. The curtain of trees my constant companion. Night fell before I could reach the outskirt of the forest, where roads and civilization marked their boundaries. I set up a tent with hands that refused to steady themselves. Sleep stayed elusive as every creak and whisper of the forest morphed into threats in my mind. It attacked in the early hours before dawn could ease night's grip on the world. Scratching against my tent was the first hint. I froze, breath jammed in my throat as silence returned for one treacherous second. Then it tore through canvas like paper. Claws, not of any creature known to these woods, gleamed in the scant light that filtered through the trees. It was massive, towering over me where I lay coiled in dread. I scrambled from the tent as it swiped again, claws catching on fabric instead of flesh by pure chance. There was nothing human about its form. Disproportionate limbs contorted as it moved with incredible speed for its size. Through terror-driven agility, I fled into the trees, the creature in close pursuit. Every step seemed labored. Its breaths came as guttural exhalations that fogged in the cold air. In my flight, I stumbled upon a park ranger's cabin, door ajar. Inside was chaos, signs of a struggle visible even in fleeting glances as I slammed and barred the entry behind me. It threw itself against the door repeatedly, each slam punctuated by roars that held no language, only violence. Hours stretched endlessly until it ceased all at once, retreating with the same abruptness it employed to shatter that fragile sense of safety night granted me. When sunlight finally dared touch the forest floor, breaking through heavy branches overhead, I ventured out from my refuge. Others needed to know what lurked among these trees, a creature unlike any wildlife documented before. Evidence littered around me, downed branches bearing deep gouges. Ground torn apart where it chased me, spoke clearer than words ever could. It took 2 days to find others, a search party scouting for missing persons, including those from our group. Vega and Darnell now confirmed dead by nameless aggression they couldn't have fathomed or escaped from either. As harrowing tales spilled from my lips, met with furrowed brows and disbelief masquerading as concern among officials, Who collected them for records that would likely dismiss truth for convenience's sake? Returning was not an option. The wilderness claimed enough victims already, but leaving offered no solace. Those imprints etched upon their lifeless faces bore into memory with permanence harsher than any physical scar inflicted by claws unseen, yet indubitably real. I spent some time last fall cleaning out my grandparents' old cabin up in the Ozarks. It's a little place way out in the sticks with no one around for miles. My buddy Rhett loves that kind of thing, so he decided to tag along and help me out with the hauling. His folks have some property in the area too, and we used to hang out there all the time when we were kids. We arrived at the cabin on a crisp Wednesday afternoon. Grandma and Grandpa passed a few years back, leaving the place pretty much deserted. We figured it'd take a few days to clean things out, a lot of old dust and musty boxes. Our plan was to haul away any junk, donate anything usable, and maybe sell a couple of antiques that might be worth something. That night, after a day of hauling boxes, we went into town for some grub. Typical greasy diner food, but we were tired and starving. When we got back, that's when things started getting weird. "Dude, did you hear that?" Red asked, pausing in the middle of unpacking his bag. "Hear what?" "That howling. Sounded like a wolf, but way too close." He squinted in the direction of the trees, the porch light casting long shadows across the yard. I chuckled. "There's coyotes around here, man. They sound freaky. Nothing to worry about." But this was different. Louder, more guttural. We both turned toward the tree line and saw the source. Eyes, two reflective spots, just beyond the porch's light. "That's not a coyote," I said under my breath. "Too big, too unnatural." Silence fell. It stood there for a few minutes, just watching. Finally, with a low, guttural growl, it slumped back into the blackness. We locked the doors and checked the windows, the hair on our necks standing straight up. The next morning we both tried to shake it off. Maybe the moonlight played tricks on our eyes, or we'd spooked ourselves. We got to work, trying to ignore the unease creeping around the edges of our brains. That day was mostly uneventful. It wasn't until after the sun went down, as we were cooking steaks over the fire pit, that things went sideways again. We were talking about some dumb movie we watched as kids, when a deep growl sent chills down my spine. There, just barely a flicker in the moonlight, was that same pair of eyes. What the hell is going on? Rhett looked as wide-eyed as I felt. "Wolves don't stalk people, dude." His words barely registered as the creature emerged fully into view. It was like a wolf, yeah, but something was all off. Too tall, hunched over with massive shoulders. Dirty, matted fur clung to its powerful limbs, ending in vicious-looking claws. The eyes, though, that's what stuck with me the most. Almost a burning orange, reflecting the firelight with impossible intensity. It let out another growl, and we scrambled back inside, slamming the door. We both tried to convince ourselves it was a bear, a very strange-looking bear. The thing outside was smart, however. It tested the windows, circling the cabin, growling and occasionally scratching at the siding. "What do we do?" Red asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Got a gun in the truck?" "Yeah, but is that going to work on whatever that thing is?" I shrugged helplessly. We couldn't stay inside forever, especially if it decided to force its way in. We needed an escape plan. After what felt like hours, the thing seemed to grow bored, its growls gradually fading as it disappeared into the night. We didn't get a wink of sleep that night. Exhaustion and adrenaline had us hearing phantom rustling and branches snapping outside till dawn broke. "Let's get out of here, man," Rhett urged as the sun painted the sky with pale light. "It's gone, come on." We agreed to stick together. Our guns were loaded and we didn't go anywhere without watching each other's backs. As Rhett was getting some stuff from the truck, I heard a rustle from the tree line, and then he yelled, not his normal voice. I whipped around, raising my gun as Rhett screamed again, but what I saw made my blood freeze. The creature had him. It pounced from the trees with uncanny speed, knocking him to the ground with a sickening. Its claws tore into Rhett's legs, and the man howled in pure agony. "Rhett," I yelled, but the thing was too quick. It sunk its teeth into his shoulder, tearing at him like a wild animal. I fired once, twice, until the creature finally seemed to notice me. It slowly turned and looked, its eyes burning with a terrible, feral intelligence that chilled me to the core. Rhett lay on the ground, moaning, his clothes stained with blood. I couldn't leave him, not like that. I kept firing, moving backwards, praying the bullets would connect. It didn't seem phased. It began edging my way, Rhett forgotten on the ground. Fear pounded in my chest, and I knew I had a choice to make: keep firing hopelessly or run for the truck. I glanced at Rhett, his ragged breaths growing fainter by the second. He mouthed something to me, something I couldn't make out. I aimed one last desperate shot at the creature, turned, and sprinted towards the truck. I don't remember much about the drive to the nearest town. My mind was a blur of panic and terror. I knew I'd done everything I could, but the guilt of leaving Rhett, it ate at me like acid. But there was no way I could go back. Not alone, not with whatever that thing was out there. Somehow I convinced the skeptical deputy that my friend had run off into the woods, maybe injured or delirious. The search was fruitless. We scoured the area for days, but there was no sign of him other than a trail of blood leading from the cabin to the spot of the struggle. The incident became a local mystery. Rumors flew around town: an escaped convict, a bear attack, a drug deal gone bad. The thing out there, whatever it was, disappeared back into the anonymity of the Ozarks. I spent weeks after in a daze. I stayed mostly at my parents' place, barely eating or sleeping, haunted by that image of the thing's burning eyes. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow, it sent me into a panic spiral. They told me to get therapy, talk about it, move on. Like that could ever fix things. I don't tell anyone the truth about that thing, about leaving Rhett behind. I know what I saw and the looks I get when I try to explain. It makes me question myself. Am I going crazy? But I know what's real. The memories are too shocked to be dreams, and there's this dread constantly simmering beneath the surface. A part of me thinks that creature ain't done yet. Months went by, the pain never fully dulling, but the nightmares started to subside. I forced myself to get back to work, to try and stick to a routine. My dad kept an eye on me, worried I was going off the deep end. Then came the news report. 2 hikers discovered skeletal remains in a remote section just across the state line. DNA confirmed it to be Rhett. The official cause of death was an animal attack. No one bought it. It was too clean. It was as if he'd been surgically dissected. That night I drummed at the creature, but this time something shifted. Its muzzle grew longer, its form stretched out on all fours. The eyes were the same, burning with that same feral hunger. In the dream, it wasn't just hunting now, it was stalking, and I was the prey. When I woke up, I knew what I had to do. There was unfinished business. The hunting supply store in town became my second home. I researched everything about the Ozarks wildlife: bears, coyotes, the standard things, but also local lore. Whispered stories about creatures that didn't fit neatly into any categories. I practiced shooting until my hands blistered, learned about tracking and survival. My dad thought I was having a breakdown. Maybe I was. But letting go, forgetting, that wasn't an option. That thing took my best friend, shattered my life. It owed me something. Weeks of preparation later, I found myself back on that dusty back road heading for my grandparents' cabin. This time I was ready, or at least as ready as I could be for facing the unknown. The cabin looked the same as I remembered it. I couldn't bring myself to go inside, though. I set up camp in a clearing, the trees looming over me like silent spectators. Agitated bursts, every branch snapping, making me sit bolt upright, gun in hand. I was constantly on edge. On the 3rd night I saw it again. Just a flash of movement in those damn eyes at the edge of the firelight. It was taunting me now, testing me. I knew I could never rest until I settled this score. The chase lasted for days. I barely slept, and ate even less. I tracked that creature through the Ozarks, driven by equal parts blind rage and an almost suicidal determination. At times the trail ran so cold I nearly gave up. Yet those eyes always seemed to find me, always leading me deeper into the woods. Then came the final confrontation, a clearing with a single gnarled oak tree in the center. As I stepped off the bus, the crisp summer air filled my lungs. The scent of pine trees and fresh lake water instantly transported me to a world away from the bustling city I called home. This was my first time at sheriff's camp, and I was bursting with excitement. The camp sprawled before me, a picturesque scene straight out of a postcard. To my left, I could see the shimmering lake, its surface broken only by the occasional jumping fish. Boys were setting up tents near the shoreline, their laughter carrying across the water. To my right, a dense forest loomed, hiding within its depths the cabins where us girls would be staying. I hefted my backpack higher on my shoulders, trying to contain my enthusiasm as I joined the throng of chattering kids making their way to the central meeting area. The gravel crunched beneath our feet, a symphony of excitement and anticipation. As we gathered in front of a makeshift stage, I took in the sights around me. Counselors in khaki shorts and navy polo shirts bustled about, clipboards in hand, trying to maintain some semblance of order. The air was thick with the smell of sunscreen and bug spray, a scent that would become all too familiar over the next week. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped onto the stage, his sheriff's badge glinting in the sunlight. He cleared his throat, and a hush fell over the crowd. "Welcome to Sheriff's Camp, kids," his booming voice carried across the field. "I'm Sheriff Johnson, and I'm thrilled to have you all here for what's going to be an unforgettable week." As he launched into the obligatory rules and regulations speech, my mind wandered. I was 11 years old, and this was my first time away from home for an extended period. A mix of excitement and nervousness churned in my stomach. "Remember," Sheriff Johnson's voice snapped me back to attention, "this camp is all about learning through experience. You'll face simulated emergencies, from tornadoes to fires, and learn how to handle them like real deputies. But most importantly, you're here to have fun and make new friends." With the speech concluded, we were divided into our cabin groups. I found myself with a group of girls around my age, all of us wide-eyed and eager to start our adventure. As we made our way up the winding path to our cabin, I struck up a conversation with the girl next to me. Her name was Kate, and she had a friendly smile and a mop of curly red hair. "Is this your first time at sheriff's camp?" I asked. Kate nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, I'm so excited. I've always wanted to learn about law enforcement. How about you?" "Same here," I replied. "I can't wait for the simulations. The tornado one sounds especially cool." We continued to chat as we climbed, the forest growing denser around us. The air became cooler, and the sunlight filtered through the leaves in dappled patterns on the ground. Finally, we reached a clearing where several log cabins stood in a semicircle. Ours was the second from the left, a cozy-looking structure with a small porch and flower boxes beneath the windows. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine and fresh linen. Bunk beds lined the walls, and a large stone fireplace dominated one end of the room. I claimed a bottom bunk near the window, quickly unpacking my things and making my bed. As I was arranging my pillow, I overheard two girls introducing themselves nearby. Their names were Maddie and Nikki, and they seemed just as excited as Kate and I were. Once we were all settled, our cabin counselors, two cheerful college-aged girls named Emily and Sarah, gathered us for a quick meeting. "All right, girls," Emily clapped her hands to get our attention. "Now that we're all unpacked, let's head down to the fire pit for some icebreaker games and s'mores." A cheer went up from the group, and we filed out of the cabin, chattering excitedly about the week ahead. As we made our way down the path, I fell into step with Kate, Maddie, and Nikki. Little did I know that these three girls would become central to the strange and unsettling events that were about to unfold. The fire pit was a large circular area surrounded by rough-hewn log benches. As we approached, I could see flames already dancing merrily in the center, casting flickering shadows on the faces of the campers gathered around. Emily and Sarah directed us to find seats, and I ended up sandwiched between Kate and Nikki, with Maddie on Nikki's other side. The warmth of the fire was comforting against the cooling evening air, and the smell of wood smoke filled my nostrils. Once everyone was settled, Emily stood up, her face dramatically lit by the firelight. "Girls," she began in a hushed tone, "before we start our games and s'mores, I think it's time for a little camp tradition." Sarah chimed in, her voice equally low and mysterious. "That's right, it's time for the story of Sally." A ripple of excitement and nervousness ran through the group. I rolled my eyes internally, already suspecting where this was going. Ghost stories were a staple of summer camps, after all. Emily took a deep breath and began. Many years ago, before this was a sheriff's camp, it was just a regular summer camp, and one of the campers was a girl named Sally. Sarah picked up the tale. Sally was about your age, and she loved to swim. Every day she would beg her counselors to let her go to the lake, but one day something went terribly wrong. Emily continued, her voice dropping even lower. Sally went to the lake alone, even though it was against the rules. She thought she was a strong swimmer, but the lake was deeper than she realized, and the current was stronger than she expected. A hush had fallen over the group. Even though I knew it was just a story, I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper now. They found Sally's body the next day, washed up on the shore, but some say that Sally never really left the camp. Emily nodded solemnly. That's right. They say that on quiet nights you can see Sally walking around the camp, still in her favorite rainbow-colored boots. She's looking for friends to play with, or maybe for someone to join her in the lake. A few of the younger girls gasped. I exchanged glances with Kate, Maddie, and Nikki, all of us trying not to laugh. It was such an obvious attempt to scare us. Sarah finished the story with a dramatic flourish. So if you hear footsteps outside your cabin at night or see a girl in rainbow boots, well, just remember the story of Sally. There was a moment of tense silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Then Emily clapped her hands, her voice returning to its normal, cheerful tone. All right, who's ready for s'mores? The spell was broken, and soon the air was filled with laughter and chatter as we roasted marshmallows and made sticky, delicious s'mores. As I bit into my treat, the gooey marshmallow and melted chocolate a perfect combination, I couldn't help but smile. It was such a classic camp experience. Can you believe that story? Kate whispered to me, her mouth full of s'more, as if we'd fall for something like that. I nodded in agreement. I know, right? They're just trying to scare the little kids. It's so cheesy. Maddie leaned in from Kate's other side. I bet they tell that story every year. Probably think it's hilarious to watch us all get scared. Nikki, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. I don't know, guys. My cousin came to this camp last year and she said some weird things happened. We all turned to look at her. Curiosity piqued despite our skepticism. What kind of weird things? I asked. Nikki shrugged, looking a bit uncomfortable. Just noises at night. Things moving around. She said one girl even saw someone outside the cabin window. Kate scoffed. Come on, Nikki. Your cousin was probably just playing along. You know how these things go. One person claims they saw something and suddenly everyone's seeing ghosts. I nodded in agreement, but I couldn't shake the tiny seed of unease that Nikki's words had planted. As we finished our s'mores and began the icebreaker games, I pushed the thoughts of Sally and her rainbow boots to the back of my mind. Little did I know that this was just the beginning of a week that would challenge everything I believed about the supernatural. As we trudged back up the path to our cabin, full of s'mores and sleepy from the games, the forest seemed different in the darkness. Shadows danced between the trees, and every snapping twig made us jump. Stupid ghost story, I muttered to myself, annoyed that it had affected me even a little. We reached the cabin and filed inside, the warm glow of the lamps a welcome sight after the dark forest. Emily and Sarah herded us through our nighttime routines, brushing teeth, changing into pajamas, and settling into our bunks. I climbed into my bed, the sheets cool against my skin. Despite my best efforts to seem unaffected by the ghost story, I couldn't help but position myself so I could see out the window next to my bunk, just in case. As the lights went out and the cabin fell into darkness, the forest outside seemed to come alive with sounds. The wind rustled through the leaves, and somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. I pulled my blanket up to my chin, trying to convince myself that every sound had a perfectly normal explanation. Sleep came fitfully that night. I drifted in and out of consciousness, each time jerking awake at some real or imagined noise. In the hazy space between sleep and wakefulness, I thought I heard footsteps outside the cabin, the soft crunch of gravel under someone's feet. But when I strained my ears, all I could hear was the gentle breathing of my cabin mates. Just as I was finally drifting off into a deeper sleep, A blood-curdling scream shattered the night's silence. I bolted upright in bed, my heart pounding. Around me I could hear the rustle of blankets and confused murmurs as the other girls woke up. "What's going on?" Kate's voice came from the bunk above me, thick with sleep but tinged with fear. Before I could answer, the scream came again, closer this time. It was coming from inside our cabin. The lights flickered on, momentarily blinding me. As my eyes adjusted, I saw Emily and Sarah rushing towards one of the bunks on the far side of the room. Mal, wake up," Emily was saying, her voice urgent but trying to remain calm. I craned my neck to see what was happening. Mal, a small, mousy-haired girl I hadn't really spoken to yet, was thrashing in her bed, her eyes wide with terror. "There was a girl," Mal gasped between sobs. "There was a girl in the window." A chill ran down my spine, and I instinctively looked towards the window by my bunk, but all I could see was darkness and the faint outline of trees. Sarah was trying to calm Mal down, speaking in soothing tones. "It's okay, Mal. It was just a dream. There's no one out there." But Mal was inconsolable. No, I saw her. She was right there, looking in at me. She had rainbow boots." A ripple of nervous whispers swept through the cabin. I exchanged a look with Kate, both of us thinking the same thing. The ghost story. But that was impossible, right? It was just a silly camp tale. Emily clapped her hands, trying to regain control of the situation. "All right, girls, everything's fine. Mal just had a nightmare. Let's all try to get back to sleep." But sleep seemed impossible now. Even after the lights were turned off again, I could hear muffled sobs coming from Mal's bunk and whispered conversations between the other girls. I lay awake for what felt like hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. It had to be a coincidence, I told myself. Mal had heard the ghost story and had a nightmare. That's all it was. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As dawn began to break, painting the sky outside our window with pale pinks and oranges, I finally drifted off into an uneasy sleep. But even in my dreams, I was haunted by the image of a girl in rainbow boots, peering in through the cabin window with hollow, lifeless eyes. The next morning I woke to the sound of hushed voices and hurried movements. As I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and sat up, I saw Mal frantically packing her things, tears streaming down her face. "Mal," I called out, my voice still groggy from sleep. "What's going on?" She looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't stay here." I climbed out of bed and walked over to her, Nikki joining me. We exchanged concerned glances before turning back to Mal. "Is this about what happened last night?" Nikki asked gently. "It was just a nightmare, Mal. The ghost story got to you, that's all." Mal shook her head vehemently. "It wasn't a nightmare, it was real, and—" She trailed off, looking around nervously before lifting the back of her shirt. I gasped. Long, angry red scratches ran down Mal's back as if someone or something had clawed at her in the night. How did that happen?" I stammered, unable to take my eyes off the marks. Mal pulled her shirt back down, her hands shaking. "I don't know," she whispered, "but I woke up with them this morning, right after I saw her." A chill ran down my spine. This was more than just a nightmare or an overactive imagination. Something had happened to Mal, something we couldn't explain away. As Mal finished packing, Emily and Sarah entered the cabin. They took one look at Mal's tear-stained face and packed bags and sighed. "Mal's parents are here to pick her up," Emily explained to the rest of us. "She's going home early." Sarah added, trying to sound cheerful. "These things happen sometimes. Homesickness can hit hard. But the rest of us are going to have a great week, right?" There were half-hearted murmurs of agreement, but I could see the uncertainty on everyone's faces. This didn't feel like simple homesickness. As Mal was led out of the cabin, I caught Kate's eye. She looked as troubled as I felt. We had both dismissed the ghost story last night, but now I wasn't so sure. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. We went through the motions of breakfast and morning activities, but there was an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there the day before. Whispered conversations stopped abruptly when counselors approached, and more than once I caught someone glancing nervously at the woods surrounding the camp. It wasn't until after lunch that I had a chance to really talk to Kate, Maddie, and Nikki about what had happened. We found a quiet spot by the lake, away from the other campers and counselors. "Okay," I said once we were settled. "What do you guys think about what happened with Mal?" Kate shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "It has to be a coincidence, right? I mean, ghosts aren't real." "But those scratches," Nikki said, her voice low. "How do you explain those?" Maddie, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Maybe she did it to herself, like sleepwalking or something." We all considered this for a moment. It seemed like a stretch, but it was more plausible than a ghost, wasn't it? "I don't know," I said finally. "It just seems too weird. The story about Sally, then Mal seeing a girl in rainbow boots, and now those scratches." Kate nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's creepy. But come on, guys, we're at a sheriff's camp. We're supposed to be learning how to think logically, solve problems. There has to be a rational explanation." "Kate's right," I agreed, feeling a bit better. "We're probably just letting our imaginations run wild. I bet by tonight we'll have forgotten all about it." But as we made our way back to the main camp area, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to say,